that. Get down. All right. There we go. Holy cow. Technical difficulties abound. Technical difficulties abound. Made it happen. Made it happen. Made it happen. Made it happen. How you guys doing today? I am having like a nice, relaxing, kind of a strange day today, but I actually managed to get this chair assembled. Cleaned my apartment a little bit. Got this chair assembled. And sitting in this chair is like so nice. Tired as hell today, DM? Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. Sorry to hear that. You stayed up late. Were you staying up late for the election? Oh goodness, going through some depression, eh? That's the worst, bud. That's the worst. I always like to say to myself when I go through a period of depression that this is my body communicating something to me, that my body is trying to do me a favor, is trying to slow me down, is trying to put me in a space where I'm everything is slower and everything is so I can focus on my life and who I am and all of this. So I always try to say to myself that my body and my subconscious are doing me a favor, right? So that it's something that you aren't inflicted with, right? It's something coming out of you that is being done to try to help you. It's that lost feeling. I know exactly what you're talking about, DM. That lost feeling of depression, right? But that's just it. That's what depression is for, right? It's setting you on this sort of lost sort of path so that you can search. And it's getting you to sleep in your bed, and it's getting you down on the ground, right? It's forcing you to not be in this heightened, winding space so that you can do the internal searching and the internal discovery. You know how I often talk on this stream about how everyone has inside of them this desire to pursue something, this innate desire to achieve something in the world? Well, depression is grinding you down because it's recognizing that something's wrong and you're not pursuing that. And so it's either saying to you, seek out what that is in the first place, or it's saying, you know what you have to do. Like, you know what you should be doing. You're just not doing it. And and that's what depression has always been for me. Like, it's always been this, like, laying you out so that you can seek and discover what it is you're here to do. What it is you're here to do. Yeah, and sometimes it can just be like you're just winding away and winding away and winding away and winding away at something that might not be actually benefiting you. And so the realization can just be what I'm doing is not actually helping me, right? That sort of a thing. And this is all just my experience with my own depression. I always like to preface that conversation by saying everybody's got a different experience and everybody's got their own kind of thing going on. And anything that you take out of your bout of depression is going to be special and specific to you because, DM, you're a special and specific person. And But what I do think is universal in the experience of depression is that it is more beneficial to you to think of the moment of depression as your subconscious and your body attempting to do you a favor, right? It's doing you a favor. So instead of thinking, woe is me, I'm being inflicted or afflicted by something that is outside of my control, that is outside of my experience, so it's like a spirit or a ghost or something, it is better to invert that narrative and say, my body is doing me a favor. What is it that it is trying to say to me? And I have always come, I have come to see it that way. And every time I accept it, that narrative, I get out of the depression faster than if I get into that kind of like affliction mindset. that it is your own subconscious communicating to you the only way that your subconscious knows how to, which is to grind you down. So I hope you get through it, but I hope you're doing well. These are strange and ridiculous times, and we're going to get through it. Hey, Chris, I don't know if I said hi to you. Good to see you. Misty, you as well. I'm glad to see you. Yeah, Misty, I'm glad that you're resting. I'm glad that you're resting. I saw that you went out to vote, and I thought to myself, oh, I hope you're not putting too much strain on yourself, especially given the outcome of this election. So, here, let's play the tune, right? I forgot to... We're streaming away, we're streaming today. I hope you're doing fine. There's so many streams for us to see, but this one here is mine. I hope that you're happy, I hope that you're well. Now come on and join me, watch the world go to hell as we are streaming away. We're streaming today, let's stream today. Oh, yes. Once again, I want to thank all my Patreons. I put together this chair, and I can tell immediately. I'm sitting in this chair right now, and my muscles in my body are literally going, ah. And so if I feel a bit loosey-goosey today, I think that's what's going on. And again, thank you to the Patreons. Thank you for your donations. Thank you so much for your support. Your donations were what was able for me to actually make this purchase and get rid of that old rickety, like literally pulled it off the street chair. So bless each and every one of you. Yeah, stayed up, watched the corrupt neoliberals take another election. Yeah, absolutely. That was the winner of this election was neoliberal capitalism, for sure. But before we get into that, you guys, you know what the deal is. You know what the deal is. Everybody, you got to pick a number. 1 and 10. We know what the deal is here. I'm going with a 2. That's where I'm at.
Here we go for today's
Mr.
number.
David Lynch.
It's September 21, 2021. 10 balls.
Dan Boxes, you're with a 2 as well.
Each
Good to see you, Dan
ball
Boxes.
has a number. Numbers 1 through 10.
Numbers 1 through 10. Here we go. Swirl. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Numbers.
Feeling 0. You can't lose with the 0, bud. You can't lose with the 0. Hey, Major, how you doing? 7
number.
for you. The divine number. What do we got? Lonnie with a 5.
Today's number is...
Here we go. Here we go. A 9. Nobody picks 9 anymore because it was never 9. And I think he picked a 9 yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Hey, Amanda Panda, how you doing today? A 9. I feel like it was a 9 yesterday, too. Hold on. One of his what's so funny about this is one of his subscribers actually keeps a sequence. Oh, no, it was 2 6s in a row. Okay. All right. So I can tell you guys are chomping at the bit for let us get into a conversation about the outcome of the election, right? The outcome of the election is essentially the same, right? Like literally, here's the this is the previous where they were at before. Liberals are at 155, conservatives at 119, Bloc at 32, NDP at 24, Greens at 2, 5 independents, and essentially the outcome is that those 5 independents just kind of diffuse into the so the NDPs gain 1, the Liberals gain 3, and I believe the Bloc gain 1. Is that right? The Bloc gain 1, and that's it. Like that's literally it. It's the Bloc come away with 2. Does that mean that the Conservatives lose us? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The Conservatives stay exactly the same. No change at all whatsoever for the Conservatives. The Liberals gain 3 seats, which is a huge change, right, from what the projection was. The projection was that they were actually going to lose seats. So they actually gain a touch of power. Those come, I believe, from the NDP, who were actually projected to do a lot better than they did. This outcome for the NDP is bad. It is bad news bears for them. That they were okay when they were on this sort of path to gaining, 6 to 7 seats. They only gained 1. This is a huge, huge, huge problem for Jugmeet Singh. The only saving grace for the NDP in that regard is the fact that nobody changed. And so, hey Duke, how you doing, bud? I know no riches and fame for anybody, Bumble Guppy. It was a 9, and nobody guessed 9. It was such a heartbreaking moment, which is exactly how we all feel, I think, in regards to this election. Everybody loses, right? Neoliberal capitalism wins. That's really what it is. That no change whatsoever. $650 million spent just to show everybody. And I mean, it's understandable, right? The Canadian populace is exhausted. Nobody wanted this election. Everybody knows that this election didn't need to happen, right? And because we're in a state of crisis, I say it all the time on this channel, right? If you are in a state of crisis and there's an election in the midst of a crisis, typically it's a war, right? An election that's held in the middle of the war benefits the incumbent, right? But in this particular case, the incumbent is not the Liberals. The incumbent is the minority government position. And the reasoning behind it is that people don't like to change government in the midst of a crisis, right? And so we didn't. Literally everybody went to the ballot boxes, with very minor exceptions. Everybody went to the ballot boxes and essentially just voted doik the same way they did last time. And we ended up with exactly the same government, no change whatsoever. The swell of support that the PPC had didn't manifest a seat. The Greens didn't lose a seat, which is good for them. Although the true outcome of this may very well be the triggering of several leadership conventions, right? That the Liberals might have a leadership review, the Conservatives might, the NDP may even, the Greens certainly will, and the Bloc may as well. So in terms of like the shift of power, nothing's probably changed, but in terms of the internal working of each individual party, you could see some big changes. Like, I suspect that Chrystia Freeland would want to become the leader here. Pierre Poilievre, probably here. I doubt that there will be a leadership review just because the NDP, like, Jugmeet Singh's base is quite supportive of him, right? The Sikh community is very, very supportive of him. Yet the $700 million election cost could have been buy a ton of apartment units for the homeless, little ways. It could have done anything. You can do anything other than this, right? And I think it is the fact that nobody needed, hey, Vince, how you doing, bud? Yeah, useless election, biggest losers with the NDP, Greens, and Conservative. Everybody lost, dude. Nope, there are no winners in this election. This was the only winners of this election were the Weston family, like the Pattisons, the Irvings, David Thompson, right? Those were the winners of this election, right? They are the primary beneficiaries of what happened here. That they wanted to see a Liberal majority as badly as Justin Trudeau did, because that means that they could have enacted their mandate pretty cleanly. Instead, now they've actually got to do politics, right? So we'll see. This sets the stage for a more interesting political dynamic, right? I like minority governments. The Liberals are not going to be keen to get into another election position because they saw what happened here, right? People didn't really shellac them for this. Like, they didn't get punished the way that can happen. But if there is a vote of no confidence, like if they can't manage to gain support for their next budget and there's a vote of no confidence, they will be punished. Hey, Ruth, how you doing? I wouldn't say it's crooked. I mean, they're crooked, obviously, but like the system works. It's just that the political class, like the people, we are exhausted, right? We're exhausted. The populace is not ready for a change. The populace is just like, we are amidst this pandemic. There is a lot of shit going on. There are thousands of people protesting in the streets. both anti-maskers and others, right? There are big disruptive things going on in the society, and I think the last thing most people want to see is a shift into, especially a majority, which is just going, like, funnily enough, the minority government situation has actually created a lot of certainty within the populace, right? A lot of good things happened because of the minority government, right? The CERB was an enormous benefit that everybody benefited from. Everybody benefited from, right? That there have been really good outcomes because of the minority government position that have created a lot of stability and certainty for people in tumultuous, uncertain times. And funnily enough, shifting into like a liberal majority or a conservative minority or anything like that just leads us into uncertainty. So I think people are actually just saying, no, what is happening is fine. Like, this is fine right now. And things are so uncertain and so difficult that keeping it this way is acceptable. Like, we can accept this. And it's hard to argue with this. Like, it's hard to argue with this, right? So I'm getting to a point where I'm forgiving everybody. Like, I'm just being like, what a dumb election. The only person I'm not really willing to forgive is the Liberals, because they called this thing when they didn't have to, right? I'm so mad. The longer I believe in electoralism, we will never get the change we need through electoralism. We need direct action. You're right about that, Vince. Like, electoralism is but one prong, right? But the most effective thing to do is to get into the streets, is to protest, is to shut down infrastructure. That's what's key. That's how you actually change the consciousness of the society. You don't change the consciousness of the society just by, putting your head down and following the rules and living your life and then like putting a thing in a box every 2 to 4 years. No, the way to do it is to get connected to a protest movement and protest. Bumblegup here. Canadians even a little suspicious or skeptical as to the motivation to hold an election at all? I feel like people generally just sort of thought that it was the arrogance of Trudeau himself. I think that's what's happening. I mean, and what is the motivation to hold this election? Obviously, they want their majority. Like, obviously, they think that they can hold a snap election, which has worked for the Liberals in the past. Like, there's precedent, right? Like, it's not just Trudeau being like, I think I could do this, right? Jean Chrétien did it, right? Held a snap election, did it. I believe even his own father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was in a minority government position, held a snap election, and seized his majority. I do think that the difference between both Chrétien and his father, Pierre Elliott, was that they offered something, right? These Liberals didn't offer a thing, right? They didn't offer a thing. No, saying that the Liberals won because they gained 3 seats, the Liberals certainly don't view this as a victory, right? They don't view it as a victory. Winning 3 seats, like, and a lot of those seats that they got back, like the 3 seats they got back, were independents who used to be Liberals anyway, right? If you look at the thing here, like the previous election, they had 157. They lost 2 seats just because of internal reasoning and all that kind of stuff, and so they became independent seats. And so now they're sitting on like 158. So really, they win 1 seat. Like, so $700 million to win a single seat. That's not a victory. That's not a victory. A lot of people didn't vote. I think that'd be interesting. I'd be interested to see. I haven't actually looked into that. Like, what percentage of Canada voted in 2021? We probably don't have that yet. Yeah, we don't have that information yet, because technically they are still counting. Like, things are still, like, but nothing's going to change. It's just, but that is an interesting fact that I would like to know. Like, did people actually go out and vote? Then again, I think we'll get another election summer 2023. So who knows? Yeah, exactly. What's important now for the Liberals is to consolidate. They cannot afford a vote of no confidence. Like, that's the truth. That if there is a vote of no confidence, and we all have to go back to the election booths, history bears out that it's the ruling party that really gets a shellacking when that happens, right? that if the Liberals put up a bill and it's no good, or a budget rather, and it's no good, and it's a vote of no confidence, unless, of course, the budget is put up and it's acceptable to the population, right? If the population looks at the budget and goes like, oh yeah, that's reasonable, and then there's a vote of no confidence, then it's the opposition parties that usually get the shellacking. But if you put up a budget and it's just like a bullshit budget, and then there's a vote of no confidence, then it's the ruling class that gets shellacked. And it's risky. It's risky. You definitely don't want to face a vote of no confidence, because then you get into the blame game situation. And the blame game, I mean, that can fall on anybody, right? Like, that can fall on anybody, and anybody can get hit with that. So you definitely don't want to face a vote of no confidence. Declaring an election is usually better, but the NDP need to win in order to do that. Exactly. There's a lot of vote splitting on the right with the PPC. Yeah, Libs pick up a seat or two. I think there's some truth to that, like the PPC as well as the new Maverick Party, which is showing up. Trudeau said Canada needed to. Hey Matthias, how you doing, bud? Trudeau said Canada needed to decide how they wanted to move forward in the critical moment in history. There is some merit to that. End of the day, the cost was too much. I agree. And what a waste of time. What a waste of time for everybody. It was a fun ride. Like, let's have a moment and be like, nostalgia moment, look through time. Right? Remember when we were all freaking out right here? This was such a moment, man. Like when Trudeau started to sink in the polls and the Conservatives were surging and everybody was like, oh, fuck. And like the Willy Wonka ad. The Willy Wonka ad, in my view, is just like one of the great moments. Like, that should be considered one of like Canada's heritage moments, right? Like that Willy Wonka ad. We should put that in a museum or something. Like, it was masterful in so many ways. Most importantly, because it effectively worked, right? It effectively worked. It caused the Conservatives to have the surge. It dropped the Liberals down, but then they equaled out, right? I think because everybody looked at the Conservatives and were like, "Oh yeah, they're Conservatives," and then the Conservatives drop back down. They never really recover, right? The Liberals never really get back up to where they started at the beginning of the campaign, right? And the NDP are the same story. They had a little minor bump, and then they just sort of planed right out for the most part. And of course, we had that big moment where the PPC were surging right near the end. Didn't really manifest into anything. So it was a bit of a ride, right? There were emotions, right? We shed some tears, but in the end, it was all for naught. More than 40% of people eligible to vote in Canada did not cast a ballot. That's pretty typical, damn boxes. This passive boycott of the electoral circus thus has greater support than any of the political parties, including the victorious Liberals, who got 5 million votes in a country with some 28 million voters. Yeah, no, it's typical. 40% of people not voting is pretty typical. And those 40% of people don't vote for very clear reasons, right? Like, all of the parties are neoliberal. There's no party that's standing up saying that we need to be socialist or that we need to be communist or anarchist or anything like that. There's no party that's standing up and saying neoliberal capitalism is a failure, right? So most people, or I shouldn't say most people, but lots of people, right, don't vote because they understand that there's not going to be a fundamental change to their life. It's not going to actually change things for them. That's the reason why people don't vote, is because they see the party system, they see the electoral political system as not beneficial to them. So why even bother doing it? Yeah, Canada needed more CERB and help with unemployment for that 70K. Well, and yet another reason why this outcome is not so bad for Canada, right? Like, it's the combination of Trudeau and the NDP, right, of the Liberals and the NDP working together, and the NDP pushing the Liberals to the left, has actually worked for Canada. It's actually been not too bad. Now what we're discussing now really is whether or not all of the benefits we gained over the course of the pandemic stick around or not. That's really the conversation that we're having now. It just has never been crystallized in such a way, right? Although I shouldn't say that. Like, there was lots of talk about like post-pandemic stuff over the course of the campaign. Again, I just think people are tired. They're just tired. They don't want to experience some sort of tumultuous, unexpected event from their electoral system. I think they were happy with what was going on, and so they were like, let's keep it going that way. Which, hard to argue that. Hard to argue. My only hope is that Jugmeet demands the ruling Liberals to implement a GLI program because of a sour economy. Now that the NDP gained a seat, I know that the NDP gaining a seat, that's it, eh? Like so it's very scary. I have little faith Trudeau will do anything progressive in the next 2 to 3 years. Here's the trouble, okay? The Liberals are in a tough spot because they want to implement a program of austerity. Like they don't want to continue with the CERB or the CRB or any of this kind of stuff, right? They don't want to raise taxes on the wealthy. They don't want to do any of that kind of stuff. But they can't vote with the Conservatives and they can't vote with the Bloc, right? If they start doing that, the populace will turn on them, as we have done in the past. So this really does mean that the Liberals have to go along with the NDP. And if the NDP are saying, hey, you can't get rid of those benefits, you can't do that kind of stuff, then they stick around. And the NDP position seems to be, let's not pound so hard on outright saying a guaranteed livable income or a basic income, but they are saying let's maintain the benefits we have. So in a way, it sort of does speak to that. I do wish that Jugmeet was fighting more for like the disabled and the homeless, right? People who we should be fighting for. We need to double disability services for sure. But we'll see. The Liberals and the Conservatives can start voting together, right? That would be it. That would be like they are allies. They work together for the same goals. It's just that they have to keep deceiving the populace into believing that they aren't allies. But they could very easily start voting together on this kind of stuff, right? And Canadians seem very unwilling to punish the Liberals for doing things like buying a pipeline, right? For this sort of stuff. So we'll see. We'll see. I missed that ad. Let's go back in time to the Willy Wonka ad. Yeah, unfortunately, Twitter pulled it. Matthias, you think that the Willy Wonka ad helped boost the PPC? Yeah. I could see that argument for sure. No, I think OToole's in trouble. Remember, guys, Andrew Scheer increased the amount of seats that the Conservatives had, right? That the Conservatives increased their seat total under Andrew Scheer and knocked the Liberals from a majority to a minority position under Andrew Scheer, and they still got rid of him, right? I think OToole's in trouble. I think he's in pretty significant trouble. The fact that the Conservatives literally walk away not only with the same seat count, so no increase whatsoever, but also with a slight increase in Liberal seats, I think Erin O'Toole is in a lot of trouble. I would be very, very surprised to see the Conservatives keep him around. You got to remember, right? Like, for as much as Conservatives pretend like we're it's leftists that are the crying snowflakes, nobody's a bigger crying snowflake than a Conservative, right? They didn't get their majority. They didn't even get an increase in seats or any of that kind of stuff. So they're crying about it. They're in the pubs drinking their beer, crying about it. And so I'd be very, 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 very concerned if I was Erin O'Toole. Like, I bet Erin O'Toole already has his concession speech, like his resignation speech ready to go. Like, I think he knows. Like it's Conservatives are very much win or lose, right? Like, and that's why they didn't like O'Toole from the outset, because I think they knew that like Erin O'Toole really wasn't going to be the guy. He wasn't like. These guys literally want Chuck Norris. Like, that's who they want. They want Chuck Norris and, like, old school, like, Texas Walker Ranger, like, Chuck Norris walking in with, like, the beard and, like, the look and all that. And they want a guy who's just going to say, I'm going to go in there and judo chop and kick and we're going to fast draw McGraw. Like, that's what they want. That's what they want. That's why Conservatives are becoming like more and more disassociated with reality, right? Because what they want are like cartoon heroes who like have like a view of politics the way that like a Lone Ranger sheriff does, where I see a problem and I pull out a pistol and I shoot it, right? Like, that's why Doug Ford is actually popular, right? That Doug Ford's view of politics is that I'm gonna when someone calls the phone, I'm gonna pick up the phone, right? He picks up his own phone. He goes, Doug Ford here, what problem can I solve? And somebody goes, I got a pothole sitting right outside my home. And Doug Ford goes, I'll be right there. And he grabs his millions of dollars and a crew, and they all go, and he like shakes the guy's hand and said, "Pothole filled, sir." And the guy goes, "Wow, Doug Ford really cares about the people, right?" And then they all vote for Doug Ford. And there's nothing ostensibly wrong about that, right? Being like a gunslinger type is fine. But the problem that Doug Ford and the conservatives face is that that's literally not how politics works. It's a good way to garner support, certainly. But the reality is that the political system is a system. Right? There's a system in place that you have to interact with, and it's like a series of levers that you pull, right? And that you move around and all of this. And you prioritize things and you funnel money into places. And so you have a system that's actually circular, and it moves in a very circular kind of way. And Doug Ford's illiterate on that count. The conservatives are illiterate on that count. They don't really understand that, like, the systemic nature of how any of this works, the cyclical nature of how any of this works. Because if they did understand that, if they did understand the cyclical nature of how an economy and how the system and how the society actually works, no one would ever believe in the idea of austerity politics. The idea that, oh, we'll cut services and cut all of this spending and cut all of that, and that will somehow grow the economy. No one would believe that if they had an understanding of economics and politics as a cyclical system. Right? All they understand is you pull up the gun and solve a problem. That you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go and fight, and then you put on your cowboy hat and ride the rodeo. 8 seconds to win. And they're like, that's how they think. That's how they think, and that's why they suck at being in power. Because not only do they deny the existence of systems or certainly downplay it. When they interact with those systems, they do incredibly dumb fuck shit. The Austerian politics, literally what you're saying is, I'm going to shrink the economy and that will grow the economy. Like, it's as dumb fuck as you can get. Hey, Crouching, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. Regardless of what the insider's saying, I think they are 100% keeping him for the next election. We will definitely see, bud. We will definitely see. I just think conservatives are fickle. They're more fickle than we are. Oh, yes. Damn, that's a nice chair, John. It is so beautiful, dude. I'm so thankful for my Patreons once again. Hey, Miranda, how you doing? I want to note that 3 First Nations reserves did not have polling stations yesterday. Bull fucking shit. Yeah, and they didn't have polling stations at, like, the universities and all that kind of stuff. There was a definite decline. And a lot of that, I think, just comes from disorganization because of the pandemic, right? And I feel like at the end of the day, this whole election does come down to that. It's a pandemic. It's a disaster. Nobody wants to actually do this. Nobody actually wants to vote. If Anime resigns and Dimitri runs and wins, I will 100% be supporting the Greens then. I think I would agree with that. Canada needs a socialist party right now. We need a party that's explicitly walking around saying that we are a socialist party. And I had Barry on yesterday, the federal secretary of Socialist Action, and he says their support for the NDP comes from the fact that the NDP is a mass workers' party. And so it would be nice to actually have a choice, though. It would be nice to actually be like, okay, which way am I going to go? And maybe actually have a legitimate conversation about where things could go. And I feel like if the Greens started talking like socialists and like communists, frankly, they could actually garner a lot of support. So it would be an exciting time. It would be an exciting time if an actual socialist took over in the Green Party. And given that Anime Paul has already talked about resigning, that's essentially as good as a resignation, right? If you start talking about resigning, you're resigning. Like, nobody's walking around being like, oh, maybe I'll quit, and then they stick around and, like, win and shit. Like, that's not what happens. Yeah, I would definitely be willing to move away from the NDP for Les Karras. I'm just not super familiar with all his positions yet, to be sure. Yeah, and that'll become more crystallized as time moves forward. The continuous abhorrent treatment of the First Nations by our government. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, it's just bullshit. Like, there just comes a point where you're just like, this is fucking bullshit. Doug Ford shoots pothole. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They just want the yeah. Yeah, Ford is a complete embarrassment. He's our next election. Well, and who knows how it's going to go, right? This outcome in this election really does just raise question marks across the board. Like, no one knows what's going on. No one knows what's going on. So it's going to be the provincial elections that are coming up are going to be very, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to take a moment here. I've been meaning to make a video about this subject, and I've talked about this almost every single day. But now that the election is over, there's a lot of New Democrats who are walking around saying, what happened, right? You've got lots of new Democrats walking around going, what happened? So I want to make a video, and I want to address the New Democrats, and specifically Jugmeet Singh, directly, because this is what I'm going to clip, and I'm going to put it up. So here we go. Hi, New Democrats. Hi, Jugmeet Singh. I hope that you're actually watching this because a lot of you are walking around saying now, hey, what happened? We were on track to actually win an election here, or win a bunch of seats, rather. Not win an election, but win a bunch of seats, right? And that didn't happen. We walked away with one extra seat, and we couldn't really garner the support of the Canadian people over this period of time. What's going on? What's going on? Well, I am here to break some really, really bad news to you and hopefully give you some solutions. Just before I get into this, please be advised and please understand, I voted NDP in this election. I supported the NDP in this election. I want to see Jugmeet Singh succeed. I support Jugmeet Singh's policies. I think that the NDP should be able to grow and should get into Canadian politics in more effective ways and stronger ways. I feel like I understand why it's not happening, and it's going to be an extremely difficult conversation. It's going to be an extremely tough time for the NDP moving forward, because when I have conversations with liberals and conservatives, which I have conversations with liberals and conservatives fairly regularly, right? You go out to your pubs, you're on the bus, you're getting your haircut, like my beautiful haircut. You have conversations with people, and the conversation turns to politics. And do you know what people say to me? Right? Do you know what people are saying to me? I'm not prompting them. I'm not asking them. They're saying this to me. Yeah, we're just not going to vote for a guy wearing a turban. That's the sad truth about what's happening in Canadian politics right now. That Jugmeet Singh, everybody likes him. Everybody's answering the phones and responding to the polls and saying, yeah, we like Jugmeet Singh. And he does well in the polls, and he's got a high level of support in regards to his likability and all of that. But it's not transferring to votes, and it's not transferring to votes because after they hang up the phone, they look at each other and they say, yeah, but Jugmeet Singh's got a turban on, right? We're not voting for a man with a turban. Jugmeet Singh needs to face this on directly. He cannot simply look at the polls and see his likability and be like, oh, that's going to carry the day. That's not going to happen. If he continues thinking that way, if the NDP continues thinking that way, you guys are going to sit at 25 seats. Maybe you'll get to 30 seats, right, if you're lucky. And that's where you're going to stop, and that's where you're going to stay forever. Because Canadians are not voting for Jugmeet Singh, not because they disagree with his policies. His policies are right in line, very popular ideas, right? It is because he is a brown man with a big giant beard wearing a turban. And if he doesn't take that on directly, he will never grow the party and he will never win. That's the truth. It's unfortunate. It's extremely sucky. I hate it a lot, and I know you do too. But it's the truth, and that's the hard road for Jugmeet Singh. I have an ad. I think Jugmeet Singh needs to do ads. Here's the ad, right? So you start the ad, and it's a guy like Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys, right? And he's got the big glasses on, and he's like, walks to his mail booth, right? And he goes, and he pulls out 3 pamphlets, right? And one says liberal, and it just says liberal on it, and it can say stay the same, right? The other says conservative on it, go backwards, right? And then the NDP, do stuff, right? And the guy looks at the liberals, oh, well, we're staying the same, and oh, I don't want to go backwards. So well, the NDP, and he opens it up and tax the rich. Dental care. Remove subsidies for oil. And he runs down the street, right? And he stops by a friend. He goes, look what the NDP are offering. Oh my goodness, it's so good. And his friend just looks at him, gives him a stink eye, closes the pamphlet, flips it over, and Jugmeet Singh's face is on the back of the pamphlet, and they both look at it, and then, pamphlet, back to him, pamphlet, back to him. Then he drops the pamphlet, looks at his friends, go, well, who are you voting for? Then it's a cut to Jugmeet Singh, and Jugmeet Singh just goes, really? Because the sad truth about what's happening in Canada is that people are not voting to tax the wealthy. They're not voting to reduce the subsidies for climate change, right? For fossil fuels. They're not voting for dental care. They're not voting to improve their society in many ways by following the policies that are being promised by the NDP, and they're not voting for it because there's a dude with a piece of cloth on his head. That's very stupid, and that's where we're at. And if Jugmeet Singh doesn't make an ad along the lines of something I've described, he's never going to win. Good luck out there. All right, that's the clip. Yeah. NDP is very stubborn, like most major parties. Well, and honestly, though, this realization is very tough, Matthias. Like, this realization, no one wants to actually believe of their fellow countrymen that the reason people are not following the policies, right, is because of a piece of cloth. Like, that it's, and I think it's beyond politeness. Like, I think it's beyond politeness, right? It's just sort of a hopefulness, I guess, if I wanted to say it in the nicest way. Like, you could say naivety if you wanted to, but I think hopefulness or a positivity, right? Like, if you're a progressive type and you believe that things can improve, right? You've got kind of a positive viewpoint of yourself and all of that kind of stuff. And it's, I do think that the NDP just don't want to admit of their fellow countrymen that a lot of them are not voting NDP because of a piece of cloth. Justin Trudeau came out in front of us in blackface singing Deo, for Christ's sakes. He came out in blackface in front of us singing Deo, right? Deo, me sing Deo, me sing Deo, me sing Deo. And daylight to come and me wanna go home. And we gave him a government, right? Like, Canadians went, blackface, so terrible, liberal, right? We voted for him, right? And we voted for him again, right? When he's walking around with that Aladdin costume, right? So we will vote for a white man wearing a turban and in brown face, but we're not going to vote for an actual Sikh walking around in a turban, right? Like, that's where Canada is. And the NDP do not want to admit it. They don't want to look at it in the face. And there's a good reason why they don't. I mean, the positive angle is one, which is like, I don't want to think that way about my own fellow countrymen and all that. But there's a second aspect to it, which is that road, that is a hard, long, difficult road. Singing it was unnecessary, Duke? Singing is always necessary, Duke. Singing is a very important part of my life, and I think that singing it was necessary, Duke. Deo is a wonderful song, and I'm not in blackface, right? I apologize if I offended anyone just then. I didn't mean to. Singh's religion wouldn't condone that approach to his campaign, unfortunately. Do you think... I don't know enough about Sikhism to comment on that. You might know more about that than I do, and I do think it needs to be addressed, though. Like, it does. It needs to be addressed, and there has to be some way for Jugmeet Singh to address this issue while also aligning with his values. And that's what I like about the ad, is that it's not it's not a condemnation, right? It's not a direct insult or slight. It is just acknowledging the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is that people are not voting NDP. People are not voting NDP. Like, literally every conversation I have, like, at some point, somebody brings the fact that he has a turban on. Like, it's literally every conversation I've been having. So I don't know what's going on in the NDP. Like, I don't know what conversations they're having or any of that. I can only tell you what I am experiencing, and there's just got to be a path forward where they can have this conversation. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. It's the NDP is going to take a lot of shit for it, but I also think that they're going to gain a lot of respect. And that's what it comes down to, is that right now people like the NDP, but they don't respect the NDP, right? And they don't respect the NDP because if the NDP are not willing to fight along those lines, then they're not really going to be willing to fight along any lines. So it's a tough road. It's a tough road for the NDP, if you ask me. And I hope that they're able to do it. I do. Because I want to live in a society where a man wearing a turban or having a big beard or, you know, being a brown dude, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's not the deciding factor, you know? I want to live in that society where we actually do think along policy lines, where we actually think along these lines of like, okay, well, how can we actually improve the society? Who is saying we are going to improve the society and how? And let's move forward on that line. We'll see. We'll see. I noticed that the moment I sang that song, everybody got quiet in the chat. Chat's gotten real quiet all of a sudden. So, the real lines, another line that's worth talking about is Maxime Bernier. People seem really interested in talking about Maxime Bernier. Supporters of Maxime Bernier's and People's Party of Canada call election rigged, right? So, one of the things that nobody's really talking about the outcome of this is that the Conservatives are actually handling it with a bit of grace and dignity, right? They're not going the way of Trump. They're not like throwing up everything and saying, oh, it's a rigged election, all this kind of stuff, because the People's Party is the party that's doing that. It's the People's Party that's walking forward and saying, some supporters have taken the quote-unquote black pill and believe the election was rigged against them because they won nothing. This is becoming like a real truism, I guess, amongst far-right people, that like the far right here in Canada and the United States, but also down in Brazil, throughout Europe, if they lose an election, they're starting to see that it's a plan. There's a planned commentary. They say the election was rigged, and this is a way for the corporate sector to try to discredit democratic structures entirely, right? That's the strategy ultimately. Like these corporate entities, like the powerful, right? They want to be rid of these corporate structures. They want to be rid of these democratic structures entirely. Like they're not interested in having a structure that's capable of fighting against them. That's not what they're interested in. So they want to get rid of them entirely. And one of the ways that you can get rid of them is by having your political surrogates discredit the system of democracy itself. Say that the elections are rigged, right? And if you can convince a large segment of your society into believing that these elections are rigged in the first place, well, then eventually these people are not going to care if you get rid of the rigged system, right? Oh, get rid of the system of democracy entirely because it's rigged anyway, right? Well, if it's rigged anyway, like it's not really democratic in the first place, is it? So it's just another way for corporate power to assert itself and dominate everything. Have you seen any indication on what percentage of the vote with the Canadian Communist Party? I haven't seen that. I think it's too early for that. Ruth said something earlier. And I think you're right here too, Ruth. That's why Enemy lost a black Jewish woman running a party is not acceptable. Yeah, there's truth to that, Ruth. I think as well. And I think you said earlier something about, I can't remember what the question was, but what percentage didn't vote? It was the question that she was asking. It's too early to tell like who got what vote on that kind of line, because all the votes are still being counted technically, and the outcomes are not going to change because of the way the percentages work and all of that. But over the next couple of days, I think we'll be able to see those answers. Probably places like Canadian Dimension will be able to answer those questions for us. So I'll keep an eye out and see what happens on that front. Bumbleguppy narrative terrorism, absolutely. Ugh. I feel oddly like depleted all of the sudden, guys. Like I gotta be honest, like I just talked about the NDP on that, and I suddenly feel like oddly depleted. Like I feel very like, I don't know, strange. Because that's a talking point that I've been saying this whole time. I've been talking about this situation that the NDP find themselves in for almost a month now. I've been saying that because it's my lived experience. But now that the election's over, I'm talking about it, and I feel oddly depleted about it. Yeah, I can't really explain why I feel this way all of a sudden. I feel oddly strange. I don't really want to live in a country where this is an issue, you know? I don't really want to live in a country where, like, a person's skin color, right? Their ethnicity or their heritage, like, really? Like, this plays? There are people who literally they don't think about politics outside of what's skin deep, really? It's very, and I'll admit, there's a little concern that I have. Like, Duke, you said singing it was unnecessary. I worry that I've offended some people out there in the world because of that. And I hope that I didn't. I honestly sang the song because I love the song. And I hope that nobody out there is offended or is holding a grudge over that. I apologize if you are, or if I stumbled into the weeds. And I just do feel like, and maybe I'm starting to feel a sense of doubt in myself, starting to feel a sense of is this fair even? But I think it is. I think it is. Thanks, Crouching. I can always rely on you. I can always rely on you, for sure. Oh yeah, and it's just. I just know that it's going to be a tough time for the NDP, and I think it's just now settling in. And it's just now settling in how tough it's going to actually be, and how difficult, because like the conversations we're going to be having, like think about these PPC guys, think about like these anti-maskers going around, right? Think about that kind of stuff. The way that they're going to respond to it, like we know that should Jugmeet Singh walk into those weeds, like how long until we're talking about Sharia law? How long until we're talking about Sharia law, right? How long until the conversation starts surrounding that ignorant bullshit? Like, how long? And like, the PPC supporters are already calling Jugmeet Singh a terrorist. Like, that's already a talking point that they already use. Like, it's very depleting. And to know now, and it's especially depleting knowing that the NDP didn't gain really any support. I think they gained the one seat, right? And knowing that they didn't gain any support, it's tough. It's tough. I'm not looking forward to it. I gotta be honest. Like I like being a political commentator, and I like being in this conversation, and I like that I'm pushing the buttons, and I like that I'm trying to galvanize people and get people into the streets and all of this, but I am not looking forward to those conversations. I really, really am not. And it does need to go there. Like, it does need to go there. So, Okay. Let's move on. Let's move on from that. Is the Communist Party in Russia saying that we think the election in Russia was rigged? I haven't heard that. For those of you who don't know, I do have a link opened here because the Communist Party, the Russians just had an election themselves. Oh, where did I have it? Come on. Where did I have it? The conservative, I must have closed it on accident. The Russians had an election, and the Communist Party, I believe they're called like the Communist Federation or something along those lines, got 20% of the popular vote, which means that they get something like 50 seats in the House. It's the strongest opposition to Vladimir Putin that he's ever faced. Like that's something really important about what's happening in Russian politics right now, is that there is an upswell of communism within Russia, and it's starting to actually be a threat to Putin's position. So, I mean, this could very easily move Putin further to the left, because Putin himself was actually further to the left than like Gorbachev and Khrushchev, right? So it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens there. They found the money that Russia sent Trump party, through a relative of Rand's Paul. He was pardoned by Trump before he left power. Of course. That's so fucking funny, dude. As long as the conservatives and liberals can narratively define the populace as a separate group instead of a single nation, the racist issue will continue. Yeah, but fascists already squatted on that. Absolutely. Did you see one of the communist leaders? She's hot. It went on Xiaonan Head's Twitter. I can always rely on you, Crouching. You're always bringing up the stuff that's important. And of course, right, always got to talk about the white supremacist live stream featuring Nick Fuentes held at PPC candidates' election party. In a clown car of far-right streamers and attempted election punditry, Tyler Russell managed to net a phone call with his aesthetic inspiration, all while apparently at an election event for a federal candidate. Yeah, I mean, like, these guys are just absolutely clowns, right? Like, the stream featured a cavalcade of guests that include Chelsea Hillier, her father, Ontario MPP Randy Hillier, and her former riding manager, white nationalist Shane Marshall, who had been reportedly fired from the campaign after being charged with assault. Other guests include multiple members of the racist Played Amy streaming collective, a swath of American streamers, and a guest of honor, white nationalist Nick Fuentes, host of America First. Like, it's really getting very difficult to talk about the PPC. The PPC was also caught employing Derek Horn, a founding member of the neo-Nazi Canadian Nationalist Party, whose former leader, Travis Parton, called for Jews to be removed once and for all from Canada. Right? Like, I don't know what we need to do to actually convince people that the PPC is dangerous. Right? Like, even yesterday, I had Barry on, and Barry is someone I respect very much, but Barry said that the PPC is not a fascist party. And I think I disagree. I thought about that through all today. I was thinking about that. Yeah, I think the PPC is explicitly a fascist party. That it's beyond the fact that they harbor fascists, right? It's beyond the fact that they just let fascists in. Like, Nick Fuentes is a fascist white supremacist. Like, he is. He's the host of a podcast called America First, for God's sakes. They're hiring neo-Nazis. Like, it just seems like we have to very much accept that there is a fascist white supremacist organization that is operating in Canada, and it's the People's Party of Canada. All right, bud, you're not going to let this go until, what's her name? And of course, the Beaverton being the one that nails it on the head. Liberals unveil 650 million spot the difference poster. Yeah, that's really the truth, eh? Like, there's like, oh, spot the difference. There's like literally a change of like 2, 3, 4 seats, something like this. At press time, Canadians already bored of the puzzle had flipped the page to read the long-running cartoon feature, Trudeau and Trudon't. That's a great that would be a great comic series. Trudeau and Trudon't, right? Trudeau. so Trudeau, support pharmacare. Trudon't, pass pharmacare. Right? Like, you could constantly just be back and forth. Fascism in a capitalist society is a matter of degree. It isn't binary. I mean, I think there's truth to that, Bumbleguppy. I mean, straight up, I gotta tell you, Bumbleguppy, you are talking to a guy. I don't see much difference between capitalism and fascism. That, like, I 100% think that capitalism is fascism and that it's all just PRing. Right? That anytime I read any academia on fascism, it's assumed that fascism is a separate system from capitalism. The assumption is that fascism is different, right? And that there's no one ever stopping and going, wait, is fascism actually different than capitalism? Are these two somehow separate systems? Is there actually a delineation between them? The assumption is baked in. And the academic work is good. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, the academic work is well done. It's well researched. But it's all predicated on this assumption that fascism and capitalism are different. And once I started asking the question, is fascism and capitalism different? I started to see pretty clearly that no, they're the same system. That, like, fascists would gladly be like singing and happy-go-lucky guys if everything was going wonderfully, right? If everybody was making billions of dollars and the underclass was subservient and like everything was like in a time of like general peace, even fascists are going to walk around and just kind of like be normal, right? And then when things get tough, they're going to pull out the sticks and start beating people, right? Well, that happens in capitalism too. So I don't really see what's the difference. I don't really get it, and nobody can really tell me what the difference actually is, and maybe there are like phases that you could go through, but those phases occur in capitalism as well, and like there's a period of time when the capitalists don't have control over the state, and it's like, okay, but like that's generally going to be true across the board, and it's an inevitability that capitalism eventually absorbs the state. So anyway. That's a big, long way of saying, I don't really know what the difference is. All right, bud. For you, Crouching, I'm doing this for you. Shoe on Head's Twitter. Shoe on Head Twitter. Here we go. Twitter search. No results. I don't know. I have no idea what you're talking about, bud. Here, maybe. Without the hashtag. Okay, here we go. Not seeing. Is this her? Right here? I didn't realize, Crouching. You're tasting women. Interesting. Okay. Oh, this has got to be her. Oh, yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from, bud. Yeah. Wouldn't that be hilarious if I just left it at that? If I was just like, oh, okay, interesting, and just like moved on. Oh, here it, for God's sakes. The Communist Party of Russia Federation has won 57 seats, 15 more than the previous election. The party has also got success to achieve 19% of votes in a rigged election claimed by the CPRF. This is phenomenal. Yeah, 57 seats, 19% votes. Isn't that always the way? I literally tell the story and then like fucking it's like right in front of my face. John. Patton Oswalt. So Jake Tapper reporting, CNN, more than 675,000 people have died of COVID-19 in the United States, surpassing the country's estimated death toll from the 1918 flu pandemic. Patton Oswalt's response, "We did it! Exclamation marks, 5 American flags. Couldn't have done it," this comes from Maya, "couldn't have done it without all my old high school classmates. Their meme research has been invaluable." Patton responds, "No time to die, only in theaters," is a gorgeously ironic phrase. Wow, what a beautiful review. I'm so proud of Patton Oswalt for getting back on stage after a long time and just loving it. Standing ovation, you deserve nothing less. USA, USA, USA. Yeah. Veal is tasty, but it's a baby cow. Boom, capitalism. Evil is easy. Yeah. Yeah. And Mocked, I agree with you. Like, the economic structure is completely the same. Like, it doesn't operate differently. Like, Hitler was a capitalist. Like, he outright was. That the word fascism comes from Mussolini's party. That he was part of a party that called themselves the Fascist Party, which is no different than saying, like, conservative or liberal party, right? Like, it's just the name of the party. And then the fascists the Allies start to call them fascists to delineate between groups of capitalists, right? It's like how you have the Allies and the Axis, right? But it's just a title that they give it. And in my view, it's a way that for capitalists to hold up a shield to defend themselves, right? That, oh, those weren't capitalists that were doing that. Hitler and Mussolini weren't capitalists, right? Even though they explicitly very much were. They weren't capitalists, right? They were fascists. So we don't need to talk about reforming or changing or getting rid of the capitalist system. We just need to get rid of the fascists. And who are the fascists? Anyone who actually commits to the logical outcome of capitalism, right? That if you actually do what capitalism wants to do logically and then have to face consequences, you're a fascist. And that's a way for the capitalist system to hold up a shield and defend itself from its largest critics. And by pretending like the two systems are different, we help them do that, right? Instead of actually reading the literature that's been written about, hey, what's up with fascism, and recognizing, oh yeah, this is a capitalist system. What that means, of course, is that documents like Mein Kampf, right? Mein Kampf is a capitalist document. It's just not written by an economist, right? That it's written by an artist and a philosopher, right? Hitler was an artist and Hitler was a philosopher. He wrote Mein Kampf. So that's a capitalist document. And people don't want to think about it that way. But I do. I do. Misty, I'm a cougar. I was just dating a 30-year-old last year. Well, you're 45, Misty? You're looking pretty good for 45, Misty. You're looking pretty good. Sorry, I'm so damn proud of that, even though he was a dink. Crouching, I'm listening, Misty. I'm going to go hide now. Okay, guys, keep it clean in the chat, all right? I don't want it to devolve. You know, this is still a family channel, right? I don't want YouTube to remove me. Yeah, exactly. Ford and General Motors were tight with Hitler. Most people don't even know. Yeah, and like Coca-Cola was selling stuff. IBM was instrumental in the erection of the Nazi concentration camps. That if it wasn't for the computing power of IBM computers at the time, they wouldn't have been able to organize the massive scale of concentration camps that they needed to, right? So, and like Hitler actually modeled much of his perspective of race relations on the way that the United States treated the black population, right? Like the interwoven nature of the Nazi Party and the United States capitalist system is pretty undeniable. There are enormous links. Yeah, capitalism can't thrive without tyranny, corruption, psychopathy, and fascism. Exactly. It can't survive. Like, and for God's sakes, just the basic history of capitalism reveals it to be true. Capitalism begins because of the transfer of serfs, right? Taking serfs off of their hereditary land, throwing the women and children into mines and factories, throwing the men onto boats in order to colonize the whole fucking planet, right? Like, this is how capitalism begins. Conscription. They take those soldiers, they go down to Africa, get a whole bunch of black slaves, bring them back to the motherland, send them over to the New World, right? This is the beginning of capitalism. And like, does this sound different somehow than what the fascists were doing, right? No. Sounds pretty close. And like, I always got to talk about this, like the 14 signs of fascism. Like, the 14 signs of fascism is one of these documents that everybody points to as like, oh, the 14 warning signs of fascism, right? Powerful and continuing nationalism. What you think that the English Empire didn't have like powerful and continuing nationalism? You think everybody holding their hearts and going, God save the Queen, right? You think there wasn't like like disdain for human rights, literally enslaving the black population of Africa while committing a genocide on the First Nations people, like disdain for human rights, identification of enemies and scapegoats, like that seems pretty straightforward, like straightforward capitalism, like McCarthyism, right? Like that's pretty common. Supremacy of the military, when has that ever not been the case in the capitalist structure? Rampant sexism, when has that ever been like that's always been the case. Controlled mass media, like when has that never been the case? Like it's you can read Manufacturing Consent to see how they control the mass media. Obsession with national security, like religion and government intertwined. Corporate power is protected. Labor power is suppressed. Disdain for intellectuals in the arts. Obsession with crime and punishment. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Fraudulent elections. Like, maybe we could have a conversation surrounding point number 14, but like, you can take a look at, interestingly, it's the general elections are not fraudulent, right? It's the internal elections of the parties that can often be quite fraudulent. Like, they stole the election outright from Bernie Sanders when it was Hillary Clinton, right? Like, that's pretty common knowledge now, that Bernie Sanders had that election stolen from him. Hey, Victini, how you doing today? How you doing today, bud? And so, like, I just don't see a difference. Like, I just don't see a difference. Every single one of these warning signs of fascism you can find in your society today, right? You can make a pretty strong argument for the fact that capitalism and fascism, like capitalism aligns really closely with this list. So I just don't, I think it kind of comes back a little bit to what I was saying about the NDP with Jugmeet Singh and this desire to not really talk about or acknowledge that people are not voting for Jugmeet Singh because he is a Sikh with a turban, right? That people don't really want to acknowledge it of their own society, right? That they want to think better of their society. They're living in this kind of place of hopefulness where no, of course my society isn't fascist. Like, of course it's not the same kind of society that a fascist society is. Of course it has to be different, right? Of course, if it wasn't, I would be so upset and I would be fighting and I would be doing all this kind of stuff. So they don't want to admit it because that would mean that they would have to actually do something about it, or they would have to live with the knowledge and the burden of it. So it's easier to be like, no, that's fascism. We're capitalism. They're different. Moving on, right? And then you can always create a moving goalpost of saying like, no, we're not moving towards fascism. Like that's the we're still capitalist, and then the goalpost keeps moving and it keeps moving steadily and steadily. No, we're not fascist. We're still capitalist. We're still capitalist, right? No, we're not fascist. We're and literally we're at a point now where like the United States literally has concentration camps, right? It literally has concentration camps along the American-Mexican border. And people are still, no. Those are detention centers. Those are detention centers. They're not concentration camps. They're detention centers. Come on, right? So like, there does come a point where it's like, what is it gonna actually take? And I mean, I think that there's gonna be like lots and lots of people who just go to their grave in this kind of state of denial. Bernie won literally every single county of West Virginia in the DNC primary of 2016. He still lost West Virginia to Hillary because of superdelegates. Exactly. Like the existence of superdelegates alone, like there's your fraudulent election right there, right? Like you don't need to, they don't even need to exert their power. like every election that occurs in the DNC is inherently fraudulent because of the existence of superdelegates. If you guys don't know, in the DNC, so you have like the delegate system, so everybody votes and that puts in delegates, and those delegates go to the conference where they actually elect the guy. But within the DNC itself, the Democratic National Committee, they have internal people who are appointed by the DNC called superdelegates, and those superdelegates are what's responsible, can override the will, basically. They have enough power within the system that they can basically just agree and say, no, it's not going to be the person that everybody's voting for. It's going to be this other person. And that's exactly what happened in a lot of these places. And Dan Boxes is correct in pointing out that it happened in West Virginia. And the superdelegates, they exist to override the will of the populace. That's what they do. So this idea that like, oh, only fascism has fraudulent elections. And it's clever what they've done, because the general election is not fraudulent. Like the general election is, well, I mean, but you could make the case that like you think about Bush v. Gore, right? Gore actually wins this election. We've done recounts on it, right? Gore wins the election in Florida. He wins it by something like 12 votes. Like, no lie. It's very, very close what happened in Florida. But the Supreme Court basically just appoints Bush by, like, fiat council. He just grabs him and says, yeah, it's you, right? And everybody goes along with this, including Gore. That's what's so stunning, is that it's including Gore. He ends up just kind of shrugging and being like, oh, okay. Because, I mean, he takes a payout. Let's be honest about what happens there. And that's a fraudulent election, right? The Supreme Court just appointing somebody. Like, what is that if not a fraudulent election? Haha, institutional racism, go burr. It's like the cons complaining about abandoning Afghans while simultaneously abhorring accepting Afghan refugees. Yeah. Oh, yeah, did you see the whipping of Haitian refugees by U.S. authorities on horseback? Yeah. Can't claim asylum if you aren't on U.S. soil. Yeah, I don't know enough about the circumstance, but the pictures themselves are pretty bad. Like, hey, whipping Haitian immigrant. Oh, man, my spelling. Like, literally dudes walking around on horseback, like with these cords you can see, right, that they use as whips in order to drive Haitians off U.S. soil. Like, this is what your money is paying for. Like, this is, if you're in the United States, this is what you pay for. Like, this is where your tax dollars go. And I mean, is it any wonder at all that the whole thing is in like free fall collapse? Is it any wonder at all that the United States is in this state of total disrepair? Like, what are these people's crime? Their crime is literally that they want to just walk over an invisible line. And, like, everybody's whipped up in this whole, like, oh, they're coming for jobs. Oh, they're jobs. And all this. But, like, nobody's got jobs anyway. So, like, what jobs are they coming to take? Like, it's so just nonsense. It's just nonsense upon nonsense. Ugh. The DNC superdelegates are a who's who of banking and corporation and lobbyists. It's obscene. Well, and it goes back even to at the end when FDR died and they had to find a replacement for him, right? Well, his vice president, I'm blanking on his name, but his vice president was very popular in the Democratic Party, and the way that he was talking was very much about inclusion and unity. He wanted to move forward in peace with the Russians, right? But the DNC insiders all got together and they supported Truman, and so Truman wins, right? And this is a common refrain. This is a common thing that happens within these parties, because the parties themselves have rigged elections, and so if the parties have rigged elections, it doesn't matter what happens in the general, because both of those parties are still pro-capitalist parties, right? They'll still support the capitalist structure, which is inherently the same as fascism. Like, it's not different. So who cares? Yeah, nationalism's so bad. Borders are socially constructed. They are meaningless. Yeah, they are meaningless, and and near as I can tell, they're more harm. They do more harm than good, right? That like for thousands and thousands of years, people walked around as if there were no borders, and then suddenly you like say, here's an invisible line that you can't cross unless you're like this type of citizen or you pass this checkpoint or whatever. Think about how much money it takes to actually maintain that. Like it's just enormous. Yes, Wallace, that was his name. Yeah, Truman's installation over Wallace. Well, and then especially because Truman turns around and drops nukes and stuff, right? Like Truman erected the CIA. And although in retrospect Truman regretted that, he regretted evicting or erecting the CIA, but he's the guy that opened that Pandora's box, and now the largest terrorist organization on the planet is the CIA. What is happening in the chat here, guys? You got baguettes. Loaf, can I call you brethren? Like brethren? And then suddenly we got baguettes everywhere. Look what you've done, Loaf. Look what you've done, Loaf of Kropotkin. How you doing, bud? It's such a good name. It's such a good name. So, here's something I wanted to talk about because I just think it's... Charlottesville neo-Nazi organizers were paid to make hate a full-time job. So, some organizers of the infamous 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, during which a neo-Nazi drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, appear to have been paid employees of white supremacist groups funded by private donors, right? So neo-Nazis are getting full-time funding by the wealthy, right? Meanwhile, I'm moving forward with little donations from you guys, $1 here, $2 here, $5 here. If you'd like to donate to me, my Patreon is down below. Thank you very much. Please consider. But like the neo-fascists that exist in our society are receiving massive support from wealthy corporate donors. That's what is happening. Which, does that sound familiar? Has there been in the past fascists who have received massive funding from industrialists and things like this? This is an incredibly dangerous situation where you have, like, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong anymore, right? There's no moral center any longer. What matters is who can get funding, right? And again, this flows to one of my major theses, which is it's dangerous to have a billionaire in the society, because if the billionaire decides to start funding neo-Nazis, well, then everybody's going to be talking about neo-Nazis, and everything's going to be about neo-Nazism, right? And you at least need to talk about it in order to refute it. You can't have policy discussions. You can't discuss things about, hey, how are we going to help people? You literally need to say, yeah, Jews are worthwhile. Like, it's good that we have Jews. Like, we shouldn't round up the Jews. Like, that's literally where we're at. Truman was a small-time nobody senator, but just like Biden, was an easy puppet for anti-communists. Exactly. Baguette for historical materialism. I will answer to brethren. It's almost like a scripted reality show, the populist movement in the US and Canada. There isn't really a populist movement in Canada. That's what's so weird. Like, the populist movement that existed, such that it existed in the United States, has been co-opted. Like, it's been completely diffused in many ways. And this, I'm sorry, I'm so distracted, you guys. You guys are all about, like, the bread emoji here. It's making me think of, like, old Bible verses. Like, you know, where Christ creates loaves of bread and fish, right? Christ feeds the 5,000. Jesus feeds the 5,000, right? Like, we're doing bread and circuses. You guys have, like, perfectly merged bread and circuses into an emoji, right? It's a digital loaf of bread. Okay, what a time to be alive. We got a great tweet here coming from Dan Price, right? If you don't know who Dan Price is the CEO of I forget the name of his company, but he's the CEO of, like, a credit card company who decided to raise his minimum wage to $70,000. That $70,000 is the minimum wage. So if you're working for him, you're making $70,000 a year. When he did it, everybody made fun of him. And now his company is turned into like a Harvard case study because the outcomes have been absurdly good. His company is making even more money than it was before. He's got enormous stability, right? Everybody wants to work for him. Nobody wants to leave. People are having more kids. Everything's super, super happy. And so he's turning into like a Harvard case study. And and of course, it's all based on like, yeah, if you stabilize people's lives, they are stable. Big fucking shocker, right? Because everybody was telling him like, oh, if you raise the minimum wage like that, you'll lose all your money to wages, right? So you won't actually be able to grow and all this kind of stuff. The opposite happened, right? He raised his wages and his line went up, right? Like he made more money than ever. Because big shocker, if you pay people properly, and if you pay people enough so that they're stable and everything's fine, they work harder for you. They do nicer things for you. They help out more. They do more, right? Big fucking shocker. And so Dan Price here, his tweets are amazing. He's got really amazing tweets. You ever lay awake at night and think about how airlines spent 96% of their free cash flow on stock buybacks for a decade, then cut 90,000 jobs as soon as trouble hit, then got a 50,000 billion bailout, then the government just kicked people off unemployment? Like, what he is describing here is the hypocrisy of the whole situation, or at least the absurdity of the entire situation, that we've given billions of dollars to massive corporations. They took all of that money, spent it on themselves, jammed it into offshore accounts, did stock buybacks, all the like. The second there was a wrinkle, the second there was any trouble whatsoever, they laid everybody off. And then while the government's giving a big bailout to the institution that laid all these people off, they're cutting unemployment. Like, you might as well say, like, this is how you would collapse an economy, right? Like, if you wanted to collapse an economy, one of the ways to do it would be to take all your money, give it to people who then jam it into offshore accounts, right? Lay everybody off, and then cut all services for those people. You have effectively collapsed your economy because the money isn't being spent and nobody can actually do any exchange or trade or any goods or anything. So we're living during this period of massive absurdity, because like it's getting to the point now where you have to start admitting outright that what we want is to collapse the economy. That's obviously what we want. We're not interested in an economy. We're not interested in erecting something that works. Like, we obviously want to collapse this thing. And all the rationale and all the reasonings of it for why they're doing this are completely detached from reality. Like, if you actually wanted to build an economy, the first thing you should be focused on are the poorest people in the society. Because if you help the poorest people in the society, then certainly the people above them are also taken care of, right? And as you lift up the poor, you also lift up the middle and then lift up the upper class, right? But if you abandon the poor, then it turns into this cycle of entropy where they get sucked into a vortex and then the middle class goes with them, as is happening now. And then the upper class goes and then the whole system goes, right? So, it seems like that's what we want. It seems like that's what we want. So the Venn diagram collapsing an economy and consolidating profits is a circle. Bumble Guppy, you got away, dude. You got away. You bring it all into just like this tight little... That's exactly it, right? Profits and collapsing the economy, that's the same. It's the same thing, right? Because the profit motive fails. It doesn't actually work, right? And it turns the people who are attempting to pursue the profit motive into sociopaths, right? These people are obviously sociopaths. Like, I was talking about it yesterday, and I got to, more to thinking about it. But we have actually witnessed in real time, and you can track it, Joe Rogan becoming a sociopath. You can actually track it. And the separation between where he was before and then where his Spotify deal lands, where he has $100 million now, right? That transition into sociopathic behavior is trackable. You can actually see it. And it's such a shame because Joe Rogan used to be a good man, right? But because he now is in this position of having all of this wealth and having all of, like, being detached from the everyday lived experience and the everyday lived life of what people are experiencing, he naturally becomes a sociopath. And it's heartbreaking to see. COVID blew a hole in his brain for sure. But I think that's just the timing, right? If it wasn't COVID, it was going to be something else. If it wasn't that, it would be something else, right? To reveal how detached and insane he has become. Because the trouble is the money. The trouble is the money. And I'm looking at other people now. Like I'm constantly looking at Hassan Piker, right? I like Hassan Piker. He hasn't gone the other direction, if you ask me. But he's getting to the point now where he can buy like nice houses. He can buy nice things for himself, right? So, but he's not like Joe Rogan rich, right? But he could be. He's quite young. Like I think he's still in his 20s, right? And if he's in his 30s, it's like early 30s. So like he's very young, getting to the point where he's starting to gain this kind of wealth and all of this. Is he going, as the wealth increases, he will become more and more of a sociopath because that's what happens and it's unavoidable. The only way to avoid it is to literally give your money away. And there are people who do this. Someone like Dolly Parton, for example. Dolly Parton is a person who has actually become a billionaire. She's gone like billionaire. It keeps happening. And why does she keep dropping back down? Because she keeps giving her money away. She literally just keeps giving her money away. And she can't give it away fast enough so that the line just keeps going like this. It just keeps going like this, and she just keeps giving it away and keeps giving it away and keeps giving it away. And the reason why Dolly Parton has never become a sociopath is because she's constantly in this state of giving her money away, right? So it's the only way to avoid it is to just give your money away. So the only way to avoid becoming a sociopath is to deny the very thing that's turning you into the sociopath. It's taking the One Ring and throwing it into Mordor. Right? Like it's climbing the hill, it's taking the ring and throwing it into Mordor instead of believing that you can put it on and use its power for good. It's just not how it's happened. It's just not how it happened. Have you ever heard of the old chestnut? You'll become a conservative when you get older. It isn't getting older, it's getting more wealth. That's exactly right. It has nothing to do with age, it has to do with wealth accumulation. And for the boomer generation, those two things were aligned, right? As you got older, you got wealthier because the boomers were in a situation where they were actually given wealth. They actually were allowed to have wealth. Unlike Gen X or Gen Y or the millennials, especially the millennials. And now Gen Z. Gen Z's fucked. And the generation that's coming up behind is just totally fucked. Like, anybody who gets any wealth now are people who literally are attaching themselves to the digital giants, right? That's the only way that you are going to make wealth in the future. And so you're going to have like a small subsect of like Gen Z who do coding and are a part of these digital platforms, and they're going to make a lot of money, right? And so as they make money, and they're going to fall for the exact same traps, right? Well, why didn't you just get a job? You should have just done this. You should have just done that. Well, just get a better job. Just go to school. Just do all this kind of stuff. And you're going to have one small segment of the society who gets all of the wealth for themselves, right? The hereditary billionaires and all these guys. And then the people who worked in the digital thing, and they'll have all the money. And everybody else will be living in poverty. And they'll say exactly the same shit that these reactionaries have been saying to us. Just get a better job. Just work harder. Just do all this kind of stuff, right? And meanwhile, they're just living in this like detached sociopathic skyscraper world where like nobody actually lives. He is 30 this year. 30's a big year, man. 30's a big year. And Loaf, you're gonna turn 30 soon? Oh, get ready for it, bud. Get ready. I thought I was ready for it. I don't think you can be ready for it. Turning 30 is like a big it changes things. People look at you differently. They do. There's a shift in how people view you and how they talk to you, in how the world interacts with you once you turn 30. It's just a truism. Like, you're officially no longer a kid. Like, you're 30. And people start calling you Mister. You know? And it's odd. It's odd. And I don't care for it myself. I gotta be honest. Do you think it's the social power that wealth represents more than the practical value of money as a means of exchange that makes people go sociopathic? I think that it's because you have so much money that you no longer need to worry about the money, and you no longer live in a world where you are worried about money. And so your perspective is detached, naturally detached from what everybody else is doing. And so all of your solutions sound childish and sound stupid because they're detached from what's actually going on, right? And it's that detachment that breeds this sociopathic mindset and this inability to understand what's actually happening in the world, like what is actually happening to the working class, and then of course with that detachment comes a detachment from empathy or compassion. Because if you had empathy for these people and you actually wanted to do something about it, you'd give your money to them, right? Like, that would be the thing that would happen. If these billionaires and these millionaires actually had empathy for the working class or the poor, they would give their money to them, right? Like, it'd be very clean. Because what an easy solution, right? I have $100 billion. This person needs literally $20,000 to survive. I will give it to him. You as well. Sure, why not? I have $100 billion, right? I could do that. So, like, that's how you know that billionaires are sociopaths straight out. If I had $1 billion, all I would do is give it away. That's all I would do. I don't need a fucking $1 billion. I don't need $1 million. I don't even need $100,000, guys. If I made $30,000 a year and that's all I ever made for myself, I'd be perfectly happy with that. And in fact, I think 30,000 is a bit much. I gotta be honest. Like, I live a very simple life. Like, my expenses are literally rent, food, and internet and electricity. And I don't really have an interest. Like, I don't need a big fucking boat. I don't need a big fucking, like, I don't need cars or any of that kind of shit. I'm not interested whatsoever, right? Not interested whatsoever. And it just seems to me that the higher up on the income scale you get, the crazier things get. Like, you own a car, so you have to maintain and upkeep and do all the things that are about the car, right? You have a house, so now you need to maintain the house and all of this and all the problems associated with that, right? Getting to like I own a boat, right? I own a space station, right? Like the enormous problems that come, like I think about my dad, like, and my dad was like a classic boomer capitalist, right? He lived the dream, and as he retired and he closed his business down and all this because it was a failing business, thanks Mulrooney, right? But as he did that, the whole time I was watching him do it, I was like, this looks like an enormous pain in the ass. What an enormous pain in the ass this all was. And it's just like, why do it? Why would anyone think that this is a good thing to do? It seems like an enormous burden. It seems thankless. And at the end of it all, what is it for, really? Like, what is it for, really? And so the fact that these billionaires aren't walking around giving their money away, like, literally, just like, give your money away. Take $1,000 and give it to a homeless guy. Like, why don't you do that? Why don't you just give, like, $20,000 to some, like, why don't you just, like, they're not even doing things like paying for the class of 2021's college degrees or something, right? They're not even doing that kind of stuff. Like these guys consider the most insipid shit charity, and that's what's most revealing about them. That all their charity is very performative. It's not actually attempting to help anyone in any kind of way, and like, just give your money to the poor. I don't know why that's so tough. I don't know, and I don't understand why it's become like. And there's a big section of the people who, if you start talking about structurally eliminating poverty, right? They don't want to structurally eliminate poverty because they want their performative acts of charity to be the way that poverty is dealt with, right? So literally, they can't eliminate the structure of poverty. That offends them. But what makes them feel good is their own personal performative charity. So it's like a feel-good project for the rich at this point, that they literally want the poor to be poor so that they can feel good about buying them a sandwich, you know? Like it's really gross. Like it's really, really gross. We're going to maintain this enormous problem so that we can feel good when we deal with it. Not eliminate it, of course, but like interact with it. Like, ugh, it's just so super gross. Super gross. It's definitely the social power. The exchange value means nothing once you have so much. You can buy anything you want whenever you want. Yeah. Not many mansions going up in the slums. No one is ready for 30. I'm 58. Still remember the existential crisis of it. Yeah. Especially these days. Like, I think it used to be 40. 40 used to be the big existential crisis because that's when a lot of these boomers realized that they'd wasted their life. Like, what was this for? But now, because capitalism is a far larger failure, and so like at 40, you're like, go out and buy the nice car. That's sort of the traditional stereotypical thing, right? But now you have these 30-year-olds who realize that even at 40, they're never going to have enough money to buy a car even, right? That's not going to happen. So the existential crisis happens earlier. Which I actually think is better, because then you can actually do something, right? You can actually arrange your life a little bit differently so that you're no longer on this manic wheel of corporate power, right? That like once you're 40, you're kind of in it. And if you're in it enough where you can go buy a nice sports car or something, right? And that's essentially what they've done. They exchange their lives and the time that they've wasted on this corporate enterprise for like a nice car. And that's supposed to justify the loss of their youth and their lives, right? Like it's quite insane, and I see that fairly regularly. Like that's what I talk about when it comes time for Christmas time, right? People exchange the time that they missed with their children with toys. That's 100% what happens. And instead of showing that they love their children by spending time with their children, they give them a trophy. That's what they exchange it for. I was good till I hit 50, but finally I became an adult around 35-ish. Yeah. I mean, I hope I never become an adult. It seems like an enormous hardship. I feel like it's an enormous burden that we're putting on ourselves. You're an adult. Go get a real job. Yeah. So this is from Shane Claiborne. When people hear us talking of casting the mighty from their thrones and raising the lowly, of filling the hungry with good things while sending the rich away empty, inevitably some will say, that sounds like socialism. But we will remind them, it is the Gospel of Luke. Right? Read that Bible, man. Read that Bible. There's good shit in there. Once you detach the Bible from these crazed evangelicals, and once you detach the Bible from this idea that it's supposed to be a magical book that is the infallible Word of God, that is being read by these crazed evangelicals, like once you detach all of that, it's a phenomenal book, man. There's some phenomenal shit in there. Like, phenomenal. Like, stuff that, like, even the classic stuff, even the stuff that I'm sure you've even heard, right? Like, love is patient, love is kind, that whole section is is poetry. And like the Psalms are beautiful. And the Song of Solomon is porn, right? I always like to remind people that there's a book in the Bible that is porn. It's literally a dude talking about like a woman that he wants to have sex with. And he's just like, I like your boobs and I like your butt. There's like a whole list of it. But what you end up with is you end up with these situations where like you can quote Bible passages, like literally, like straight up Bible passages, and they'll say that sounds like socialism, and you're literally like, sorry, dude, like that's the Bible. And what's happening is that you have these fake Christians who are walking around pretending like they read the book, and then you have communists walking around who are actually closer adherents to the tenets of the Bible than the fake Christians, right? So it's an age of absurdism. Like everything is topsy-turvy. Up is down, left is right. Nah, it's getting done what's responsible before you have fun. I don't know. I just feel like that's just being alive. And you put a title on it, you call it being an adult. I understand. Bo is a cool guy. I like him. Yeah, I understand what you mean, Ruth. Like it is about if you have to choose between doing what's necessary and doing what's fun. It's about choosing what's necessary, right? Like that's what it's about. And there's this interesting phenomenon that's happening these days where I don't want to do little things, right? Like where I get caught up on doing little things, and it's because those little things, I have this intrinsic fear inside of myself that if I do this little thing, it's actually going to cascade into like a big thing. So like, I didn't get my hair cut for forever, right? And I wanted to, and I kept talking about it. And the reason why is that I didn't want to actually interact with the system in order to set an appointment, because I was concerned that that would cascade into some ridiculous big long thing. And then when I finally just did it, it was actually quite easy and straightforward. And it's because like I live in this system where if you interact with the EI system, if you interact with the taxation system, it's like, are you going to get punished? Are you going to like interact with the system and then all of a sudden you're going to get a letter from the government saying you owe us $1,000? So it's very difficult for me to want to interact with the system because the system keeps punishing me, right? And even in little tiny ways. So I don't want to adult, because it seems like adulting results in getting punished constantly. And punished in stupid ways, in ways that are like very Kafka-esque, where you're just like, this seems so illegitimate. It seems so ridiculous. But such is the life that we live. Such is the life that we live. Have you seen Bo of the Fifth Column's last video? I don't think I have. Let's take a quick look here. Bo of the Fifth Column. Three minutes. Is this the one? Brief history of mRNA. Is this what you're talking about? Because there's another one here. Indiana quitting. Trump versus McConnell. Probably not that one, right? Is it the brief history of mRNA? Because it's like 3 minutes.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So today we're going to talk about research and how long research normally takes.
Uh-oh. Nurses in Indiana? Which one are we talking about here, love? Which one are we talking about? I don't really get too deep into the COVID stuff because let's talk about the importance of understanding basic philosophies. Uh-oh. Basic philosophies. Here you go, 3 days ago.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So today we're going to talk about why it's important to get a base understanding of the various philosophies that are out there. And not just go off of the preconceived notion that you may have based on the way the word gets used in common conversation in the United States. Because a lot of times, the philosophy and the way the word gets used, they're not the same. In fact, sometimes they're not even close. And if you have a base understanding of the various philosophies, if you come across an issue and you're looking at something and you're thinking, man, this is the real problem right here, you might know that somebody's already devoted a whole lot of time to talking about that exact issue. And while you may not agree with their take completely, it may give you a foundation to come up with your own idea, your own philosophy. We're going to do this because under that video where I was talking about spears, somebody left a message. Somebody left a comment. And I don't mind saying that because I've seen this person comment for a long time. They have a very thick skin. They're not going to mind this at all. And this is the comment. Tax the rich won't work because there aren't enough rich. The main problem I have with progressivism is that the only solution it offers is the redistribution of wealth. The real problem that no one addresses is the system that allowed the wealth to get sucked up to the top in the first place. There was a time in this country when a bricklayer, a plumber, a carpenter, an electrician, or a mechanic could make a living, buy a house, and raise a family on the income of plying his trade. That time is gone, and these are things that can't be outsourced to China. There was a time in this country when a man who had as little as 40 acres of land could provide for himself and raise a family on what he could produce on that land and contribute food to the greater society as well. The system has not adapted to changing conditions in a way that benefits the majority of citizens. The progressive solution, some form of socialism, has already been proven a failure everywhere it has been tried. We have thrown money at these problems, money at these problems, and money at these problems, and have only proved they cannot be solved with money. Any good ideas out there? I'm at a loss. Okay, this person is a homesteader, and that's important because it factors into the rest of it. People who homestead, they are people who have made the conscious decision to live without the state as much as humanly possible. Okay? So we can use that as a basis for where this person is coming from. On top of that, we know that money isn't really what they're looking for. They're looking for a standard of living. They're looking for value, not necessarily cash. Okay? Because that helps narrow down the different philosophies. And then we're talking about somebody who wants the mechanic, who turns the wrench to retain most or all of the value, the wealth that is created by them working. They don't think it should go to the person who owns the wrench and the lift. It should go to the mechanic. The mechanic should own that. The mechanic should own the means of doing their work, and then they should get the value that they create by working. And if everybody does this, well, everybody benefits. Everybody puts out what they can, and they get what they need, right? So the farmer can feed himself and his family and contribute to greater society. So this, in essence, would eliminate that wealthy class of people, those people who own stuff and just leverage that ownership to accumulate more wealth. They would end up being gone. It's not an uncommon philosophy among rural people, and as a homesteader, this person is probably pretty rural. So what do we have? We have a stateless, classless, moneyless society where the wealth is retained by the workers. You're to the left of me. You are to the left of me. There is a person who has written about this exact problem and has these same solutions that you're kind of indicating in this message. You are to the left of me. What you are describing is communism. Don't take it as an insult. We're talking about the philosophy. We're not talking about the way it gets used in the United States, which means totalitarianism. We're talking about the actual philosophy. That's what you're describing. And it's not really a surprise. I've said it before. Rural people, we live our lives by leftist economic ideals every single day. From the co-op to the union to farm aid to the way that we trade canned veggies for eggs. It's how we get by. But many people in rural areas are socially conservative. And although you didn't say anything in this message to suggest that, you did constantly say his family, the man's doing the work, and there's a nostalgia looking back at a better time. You're probably socially conservative. And that's one of the reasons people find it hard to lean left when, if they, unprompted, with no guidance whatever, lay out the issues and kind of indicate where they think the solutions would be, they land on, in this case, an incredibly far left philosophy. This happens a lot. You know, when you hear them say stuff like, well, the workers should own the means of production. The worker should own the wrench and the lift. Therefore, they keep the value. I'm certain that this person has probably never would have considered themselves as a adherent to this philosophy. Why? Because most Americans don't have a good understanding of these various philosophies, especially when it comes to economics. Because, you know, I'll just go ahead and take the main message from Maxey. Economic theory is boring. It's boring. It's homework for most people. There are some who enjoy reading it, but overwhelmingly, most people sit down to read it, and they have to take notes, and they have to look up terms. It's homework. But it's worth the effort. Because even though this homesteader, they may never want to be associated with that philosophy, if they read it, they'll get a basis for a philosophy of their own. Even if you don't want to spend the time and read all of the texts that are out there about the various philosophies and theories, hit the Wikipedia article for each one and just read through it. It doesn't take much. It's a base understanding. There are people, as soon as I got to doesn't really care about the state and moneyless, they already knew where this was going. Because, these are key pieces of that philosophy. And it's all contained in this message that wasn't intended to lean that way. The whole purpose of the message is that progressive ideas, left ideas, aren't any good. Here's the problems as I see them, and kind of indicate the solutions. And it's not just a little left, it's far left. This happens a lot, especially among rural people. Every day. This is how we get by. It is how we survive. If you're a homesteader, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because the only way you're going to make it is through the kind of cooperation that exists in leftist philosophy. Again, it doesn't take much to get a base understanding of them. But if you do, you're better informed. You can kind of use the information that other people have thought of and inform your own ideas. I don't expect this person to suddenly start screaming, "Workers of the world unite." But if they dug into this, what I actually think would happen is that they may even end up further left than they already are. But it's a philosophy. Don't let the way words get used in common conversation dictate whether or not you're going to look at the philosophy behind that word. Because, we associate that with the Soviet Union. And because of the security measures they put in place and the way many countries behaved, we associate that term with tyranny, with totalitarianism, Part of that is grounded in reality, and part of it's Cold War propaganda. But understand that those countries, they never got to where they wanted to go. That's why you often hear people say, well, we've actually never had a country that really got to this. They never got to that point. They were trying to get there. That's true. That's true. They never got to where they wanted to go. Now, you can chalk that up to human nature. You can chalk it up to corruption. You can chalk it up to the Cold War itself. But at the end of the day, they never did really get there. So we don't know if it would function. We don't know if it's against human nature. I'm going to suggest, at least on a local level, it's not. Because it's how we survive out here. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good day.
Well, not a nice video. What a nice video that Bo did there. It reminded me very much of Michael Parenti would tell a story about how he would be saying something about, like, he would come up with an idea about how to resolve some kind of thing or something, and somebody would say to him, like, you sound like Karl Marx. And it just kind of kept happening to him, where he would, like, say something that he had come up with or he had thought of. And of course, his joke is like, who's this loser Karl Marx stealing all my ideas? But this is sort of what leads him to Marxism, is that he would say something and somebody would say, like, that sounds like communism or that sounds like Marxism. And before he knows it, then he's reading the whole thing, right? And I like what Bo is saying there. It's absolutely the truth that, like, we get lost so much in, like, when you start talking, people try to do this. They try to attach what you're saying to some of the worst possible outcomes that can exist out there. And even someone like Bo he seems very willing to attach the Soviet Union to authoritarianism or to a rising security state or something like this. And I mean, my defense of the Soviet Union is very clear. When you're fighting Nazis, right, you definitely need to have a heightened security state. Like, sorry, you're fighting Nazis. Like, you absolutely have to have some kind of defensive measure in order to defeat Nazis. Like, and if you think otherwise, I think that's kind of strange. And to call that authoritarianism seems odd to me, right? You're fighting Nazis. Like, you're fighting, like, extreme terrorists and extreme genocidal maniacs. Yeah, you got to erect security measures and security ways to fight against Nazis. Yeah. And it's always odd to me, right, how people will talk about the Soviet Union and talk about what they do or what they've done, but they won't really talk about the Nazis. Like, they won't really talk about how the Soviet Union was fighting against Nazism. Isn't that very interesting? Isn't that very interesting how we've been so heavily bombarded and propagandized with anti-communist and anti-Soviet rhetoric, but we don't ever bother to put it within the context of what was going on at that time, which was the rise of Hitler's Nazis and, like, the full-scale invasion of the Soviet Union by the Nazis. Like, it's what a strange thing to do, right? And we get really caught up in labels and condemnation of things that we don't really understand. So I really like Bo's thing of being like, maybe go actually get, like, a bit better of an understanding. And it's essentially what I'm saying about the Bible, right? Just, like, literally, go read this thing. And don't read it as if it's, like, this mystical, magical document, because it's not, right? Like, it was written by people who were writing it during a period of time. And if all you want to do is cherry pick shit, then you can make the book say whatever you like. But if you actually read the thing and come to a larger, more holistic understanding of what the book actually says, like, I don't understand how it is that the people who profess to be experts in the Bible will condemn homosexuals when there's, like, literally three lines in the entire book that deal with the subject of homosexuality at all. And most of them are, and like, they're, like, kind of one-offs, right? Like, they're just off on this other line. While the leader of the entire faith, Christ himself, never talked about it. And then on top of that, has a direct commandment where he says, love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God with all your heart. That's the primary thing to focus on. But instead of putting everything through that lens, we're going to pay attention to something Paul wrote in Romans, like chapter 35 or something, where he did like a one-liner where he mentioned homosexuality and like a list of other things, right? Completely bereft of context of what was going on during the Roman Empire at that time, that homosexuality and rape were actually quite linked. Like, forget any of that. Like, you don't need to pay attention to that. Oh, yeah, we're going to lift that passage that Paul said out of that book and then universalize it. Like, what there's something wrong going on. Like, there's something wrong going on. And funnily enough, a little bit of a departure, there is, so Paul is the person who writes that passage, right? And there is credible evidence within the text itself, as argued by a fellow by the name of John Shelby Spong, who is an Anglican bishop. He argued in his book, reclaiming the Bible for a secular world, and he argued pretty effectively, if you ask me, that Paul was probably gay, given the information that he himself gives in his own writings. Because he continuously talks about this thorn that he deals with and this curse that God has put upon him. And biblical scholars can't really figure it out. They're like, well, what is this that Paul is talking about? Because he's not being explicit about it, right? For obvious reasons. And John Shelby Spong says, well, given everything he said, the only thing that fits is that he's gay, right? And a gay man in denial or living in a society that doesn't allow him to be gay, also simultaneously coming out strong against homosexuality, which Paul doesn't come out strong against homosexuality. It's literally a one-off line off in the corner somewhere. But like, that's not unheard of, right? That's not unheard of. So it's, so I always recommend to people, like, read this fucking thing. Like, read this fucking book. And like, it's going to raise a lot of questions for you. But what always happens is that you start to contextualize it within the Roman Empire, which is where the book comes from, the New Testament at least. And you're always going to learn something interesting and new about what was going on during that time, which ultimately is going to teach you something about the human condition and what it is to be a human being in the world at all, in the first place. Which, isn't that the whole fucking point? Isn't that the whole fucking point? Is to learn something about what it is to be a human and how to be a human and how to live in the world, right? Yeah, 1 John 4:8, God is love, so therefore love the Lord is literally love. Yeah. And I have come to interpret the love the Lord your God with all your heart to mean love the environment, right? That all of the theologians and everybody said that God is the collection of all things, right? God is like everything. And so if you love the Lord your God with all your heart, that means you love everything. That means you love the environment. That means you love the place you are in, right? And loving your neighbor as yourself is itself even a restatement of that. Because if God is the collection of all things, well then that means that you are God and I am God, and we are all part of this larger superstructure that we call God. And in a way it's about creating problems. That the capitalist class needs to create problems. They need to complicate this conversation, right? Because they can't have us come to simple conclusions. They can't have us say very simple things like maybe everyone should have food. Maybe everyone should have shelter, right? Things need to be made complex and made difficult on purpose in order to ensure that those outcomes can't ever happen. Because if you eliminate that false scarcity, then you can't exploit people for profit, right? Because you're focused on the profit motive. You're not focused on God or loving anybody. You don't care about the Bible. You care about profit. That's what you care about. So thank you so much, Loaf, for having us watch that. That was really good. Bo of the Fifth Column. He seems to be a very wise and prescient and calm sort of man. I'm glad that his voice is in the conversation for sure. And Yeah, same thing when fighting the forces of capitalist hegemony. The Iron Curtain kept things out as well as in. Yeah, well, and I mean, you need an Iron Curtain if you're fucking fighting Nazis, for God's sakes. Like, that's the thing. Big news coming out of China, and I've also got a really great article about China coming up here. China will not build new coal-fired power plants abroad. So China is actually moving to eliminate coal. Some of the comments: China now joins South Korea, Japan, and other G7 nations in committing to end international funding for coal. This is a positive signal ahead of Glasgow Climate Summit. The tides are turning to consign coal to history. It also delivers on China's promise to rein in the climate impact on its Belt and Road Initiative. An end to Chinese finance could facilitate the cancellation of over 40 gigawatts of pipeline projects in 20 countries. So, starting to take more seriously the climate issue. One of the big critiques that I feel you can levy to the Chinese Communist Party is, especially over the last 40 years, they have rapidly moved towards polluting the planet in their process of industrialization. And it does seem as though China is now starting to take seriously its own impact and its own participation in polluting the planet and taking the science of climate change more seriously, because we have to be taking the science of climate change much more seriously. Yeah, man, think about how much of a capitalist society is just made up. Yep, property ownership, money class, it's just made up. Exactly. Money got mixed up with God instead of love, respect, and family, and empathy. Yeah, and it's that's exactly the truth. That's exactly the truth. And that things are actually quite simple, right? Especially now. Especially now. We have all the housing we need. We have all this technology. We have all this stuff. And in funny ways, we have all this technology, but we've built all of it to break. We've built all of it to become obsolete on purpose, right? Think about how fucking stupid that is. That we literally could have built all this technology to last 200 years, to last forever if we wanted to, but we didn't. We literally built it to break as fast as we possibly could. It's insipid. It's insipid. And we have all this, and we've got this enormous this enormous agricultural machine that can produce twice the food we need, right? But there are people starving. It doesn't make any fucking sense. We live on a planet that wants to feed us, that wants to shelter us, that wants to protect us, that wants to do all of this kind of stuff, right? We just seem to be incapable of understanding that the way to actually move forward is to let it, right? Is to instead create false scarcity, to withhold food and shelter from people, so to force them into stupid jobs that are dumb. And they are dumb. Right? They are dumb. If you're working in a cafe giving lattes to people, that's fucking dumb. That's fine if you were doing that and that was what you were here to do, and you're a latte artist and all that kind of stuff. I have no problem with that, right? But the idea that that's what a person needs to do, or they starve homeless on the streets, that's fucking stupid. That's stupid. It doesn't make sense at all. It only makes sense to the evilest person in the room. I hope that big real estate company collapses. I want to see them beg the Chinese government for a bailout, and they just say no. Yeah. I mean, and China, interestingly, okay, so here's a great opportunity to get into this. The Wall Street Journal manages to write one of the most prescient articles that I have ever seen come out of any American outlet. It's very, very aware. For real, they're saying things in this document previous leaders here. Local residents credit Mr. Xi's targeted approach to poverty alleviation, which includes assigning local officials to affected households. Previous leaders also talked about helping the poor, a resident named Zhang told a visiting journal reporter in the spring of 2020. But he really cares about us. That's the final line of this article in the Wall Street Journal, for God's sakes, right? So there's a turning tide. There's something happening in even American culture where they're beginning to see we can't actually succeed if we continue to fight along these lines of demonization. If we continue to just demonize China, they are going to actually defeat us. And I want to live in a society, I would love to live in a society where the United States starts to see China as an equal, or as a peer, at least, as not as someone to compete and fight against, but as someone to work with and collaborate with. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to live in a world where the world's superpowers, instead of actively attempting to destroy one another or seeing one another as threats, saw one another as just as peers, as people to organize with, as people to learn from, as that when you compare and contrast what you are doing compared to what they are doing, you're not doing it in order to shit on them, you're literally doing it in order to learn from them. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And this Wall Street Journal article was very heartening. It was very heartening to see that the Wall Street Journal actually published this. And like Xi Jinping's campaign against private enterprise is increasingly clear, is far more ambitious than meets the eye. The Chinese president is not just trying to rein in a few big tech and other companies and show who is boss in China. He's trying to roll back China's decades-long evolution towards Western-style capitalism and put the country on a different path entirely. A close examination of Mr. Xi's writings and his discussions with party officials and interviews with people involved in policymaking show. For most of the 40 years after Deng Xiaoping first unleashed economic reforms in China, Communist Party leaders gave market forces wider room to flourish. That opening helped lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty and create trillions in dollars of wealth, but it also led to rampant corruption and eroded the ideological basis for continued communist rule. In Mr. Xi's opinion, private capital now has been allowed to run amok, menacing the party's legitimacy. Officials familiar with his priorities say, the Wall Street Journal examination shows he is trying forcefully to get China back to the vision of Mao Zedong, who saw capitalism as a transitory phase on the road to socialism. Mr. Xi isn't planning to eradicate market forces, the journal examination indicates, but he appears to want a state in which the party does more to steer flows of money, set tighter parameters for entrepreneurs and investors, and their ability to make profits, and exercises even more control over the economy than now. In essence, this suggests that he aims to rewrite the rules of business in what could someday be the world's biggest economy. China has entered a new stage of development, Mr. Xi declared in a speech in January. The goal, he said, is to build China into a modern socialist power. Mr. Xi's overhaul has generated more than 100 regulatory actions, government directives, and policy changes since last year, according to a journal tally, including steps aimed at breaking the market dominance of companies such as e-commerce behemoth Alibaba Group Holdings Limited, conglomerate Tencent Holdings Limited, and ride-sharing leader Didi Global Incorporated. The government's recent measures to tame housing prices are worsening a cash crunch at China Evergrande Group, a heavily indebted real estate developer sending chills across global markets. Beijing is unlikely to bail out Evergrande the way it has rescued many state firms, analysts say, and could further tighten the regulatory screws on other private developers. Mr. Xi has signaled plans to go much further. During a leadership meeting in August, he emphasized a goal of common prosperity, which calls for a more equal distribution of wealth. This would be achieved in part through more government intervention in the economy and more steps to get rich to share the fruits of their success. On August 29th, online commentary circulated by state media called it a profound revolution for the country. Xi does think he is moving to a new kind of system that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, said Barry Naughton, a China economy expert at the University of California, San Diego. I call it a government-steered economy. A number of countries closely regulating industry, labor, and markets set monetary policy and provide subsidies to help boost their economies. In Mr. Xi's version, the government would have a level of control that would allow it to steer the economy and industry along a path of its choosing and channel private resources into strengthening state power. The big risk for China and Mr. Xi is that the push winds up suppressing much of the entrepreneurial energy that has empowered China's boom and years of innovation. For foreign businesses, the campaign likely means more turbulence ahead. Western companies have always had to toe the party line in China, but they are increasingly asked to do more, including sharing personal user data and accepting party members as employees. They could be pressed to sacrifice more profits to help Beijing achieve its goal. Supervision over foreign capital will be strengthened, said a person familiar with the thinking at China's top markets regulator, so it won't be able to obtain ultra-high profits in China through monopoly and capital market operations. The Information Office of the State Council, China's top government body, didn't respond to questions for this article. So, and it goes on and on and on. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's like a big read. But like, it starts to get into like, oh, how bad is this for capitalism? How bad is this for the free market and all of this? It touches through that a little bit, but I think it's quite fair. In fact, I actually think I'll share it here in the chat because I think that it's a good article worthy of reading. But it's, but in my view, it really does highlight that what China has seen from capitalism is something to be concerned about, right? And Bumbleguppy, you're hitting it on that. Like, free market capitalism breeds corruption? No way. That China went through a period of free market reform under Deng, as they say, right? But now they are hitting a place where they are beginning to see that capitalism cannot be the solution. That you can't base your whole society on these capitalist principles and on free market capitalism, because capitalism inherently destroys itself, right? And that if you create a society that's based on capitalist ideals, you will ultimately end up having to face people like Donald Trump, right? People like Adolf Hitler, like that will emerge from your society, and you have to be extremely concerned about that. And I just feel like the Communist Party began to experience what this corruption was going to start to do. Xi Jinping was elected on a platform of anti-corruption. Remember, that was his platform promise, was to eliminate corruption. And he's been quite effective in it, and people think he's been effective in it, right? And so the idea that, so now I feel as he's gotten older and as he's been a ruler for about a decade now, he's beginning to see and recognize that this corruption is endemic and is part of the capitalist model. And so to rein in corruption ultimately, to deal with the corruption that comes from the capitalist structure, you have to, at the very least, take control of the capitalist structure. And important, good to see you. Don't think I've ever seen you before. I hope you've got something interesting to say. If capitalism only works on a large scale because of the inherent selfishness of the average person, how would communism, which relies on selflessness, ever work without authoritarian control? Simple answer, it's a pipe dream. No, I disagree with you. And I don't necessarily know that communism does rely on selflessness. It's simply the case that there are basic premises within communism that say that while capitalism says it's the inherent selfishness that drives things forward, which is why the capitalist model is failing, right? That capitalism is only really propelling itself forward now because of the war that it commits, right? That's how capitalism has always worked, right? It inflicts war upon the populace and upon the society and upon the global society. It invades nations and steals their resources and enslaves their population. That's how capitalism actually propels itself forward. And the problem with that is that eventually you run out of other people's stuff to steal, right? And of course, eventually the capitalists will turn on themselves and then destroy themselves, which is what we're witnessing today. Communism, on the other hand, and I find this kind of statement of a quote-unquote authoritarian control to be somewhat amusing, because when you say authoritarian control, and anytime I've heard anybody say authoritarian control, when I actually break that down and see, okay, what are you even talking about? Like, what are you even talking about when you say authoritarian control? What I generally find is that you're saying that there are rules that the nation follows, right? That we're so used to living in this sort of free market society where there really are no rules, and the rules that exist only for the poor. The wealthy never really have to face any consequences for their actions. They don't really have rules. And because we've been living without rules for so long, when we see a society that has rules and follows them, we cry authoritarianism, right? It's not authoritarianism to have rules, especially in a society that like elects its leadership, right? Like and the idea that like communism is a pipe dream. I mean, every communist society has experienced an increase in the average life expectancy of its citizenry, an increase in literacy rates, a decrease in poverty, right? An increase in the caloric intake of its people. Like, and that's true of the Soviet Union. That's true of China. That's true of Laos and Cambodia, right? There is no, this idea that it's quote unquote a pipe dream, I think is just your own kind of entrenched bias against these communist systems. So I recommend, I think that reading this article is a good start to find out more about what's going on in China. You can even read the Wikipedia article. I mean, what has happened in China is an economic miracle. Like it is an outright miracle. And it's going to become more obvious as time moves forward. Important. It's good. I hope you're still here. Lots of people like yourself pop in, make their big claim, and then just leave. I hope you don't. I hope you actually are here to learn something and figure something out about what's going on in the world. These things are going to become more obvious as time moves forward, right? That as China begins to split away from the United States in terms of its power and how it interacts with the rest of the world, and as the United States declines, because it is going through a fairly major decline, certainly in prestige on the world stage. The new military arrangement that the Americans erected with the UK and the Australians sort of show that to be the case. Like, why isn't that just a NATO initiative? Well, it's because the members of NATO don't want to go along with the United States on that. So the United States is diminishing in power. It's losing its capacity to steal resources from the rest of the planet, because its military system is no longer functioning, because less people are joining the military because they understand they're seeing what it is, right? They're seeing that these invasions are not actually benefiting anybody. They're seeing that these invasions are actually just a way to funnel money into the hands of weapons manufacturers, right? And if you don't have any people to fight your wars, well, then you can't fight any wars. And that's more or less what is happening to the American empire today. And ultimately, I just land on, like, capitalism doesn't work, right? It certainly doesn't work in any way that I would say is tolerable. Well, what do we do under capitalism, right? We grind away at jobs that are pointless, that facilitate nothing except to alienate ourselves from our communities, from our societies, from the people around us, to treat each other as if we are commodities to be bought and sold. It increases our aggression. It increases all of these things, because we don't live in a society. We live in a business where if you can't sell yourself or buy someone, you're not actually part of the model, right? You're either selling yourself or you're buying someone. And if you're not doing that, you're not living in capitalism. And this way of existing deprives us of our base humanity. We have everything stripped away from us as humans so that we can facilitate the enrichment of a small group of people who do not work, provide no value for anyone, and who are worthless. And the more we learn about them, the more we realize how sociopathic they actually are, right? So I strongly encourage you to rethink your views on communism and capitalism. And as we move forward, it's going to become more and more obvious that the communist model is superior to the capitalist model. That capitalism will survive in small scale ways, but I view it as the same way as I view fire, right? I don't let fire out of my fireplace to take over my house and say the free market will decide, right? I keep fire in the fireplace. It has benefits as fire does, but I don't trust free market fire. Fire needs to be very much contained and very much controlled with special tools, right? And I feel that way about capitalism as well. And end of the day, if you're still here, important, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing well and that everything is working out for you, bud. I really do. If you reward selfishness, you get a selfish society. If you reward cooperation, you get a cooperative society. Well, and again, Bumble Guppy, like, we don't really have a society, right? Like, we're just a business. Like, it's all interactions are business interactions. There's no, it's not really possible to erect meaningful relationships and meaningful communities or anything like that, because everything ultimately boils down to how do you make money? And so that's just a business model, right? That's why the churches are fraudulent. That's why the academic system is fraudulent, because everything boils down to how do you sell it. And if you're doing that, you're not interested in building a society. You're interested in building a business. I know Commie Margaret Thatcher. That's, well, one of my strong tactics, Loaf, and I think everybody should be doing this all the time. Take the slogans of your enemies and co-opt them, right? Like, the problem with capitalism is eventually you run out of places to bomb, right? That's the problem with capitalism. And Margaret Thatcher's statement, right, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. All it reveals is that she doesn't really understand basic economics, right? Like, she literally doesn't understand basic economics, and which is true. She doesn't understand it. It was just a cute thing to say, right? It's just got a snappy kind of way about it. And if you're talking to other people who don't understand basic economics, then you can make it make sense, right? The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. So because the economy operates in a cycle, you never actually run out of money. There's no such thing as running out of money. Like, that doesn't exist. Like, the idea that, like, oh no, we took all the money from the rich people and used it to do other things, so that money evaporated. It's gone. It's literally not how it works. If you were to take money from the wealthy, right, so you run out of other people's money, and you put it into a system that cycles on itself, that means that you've put that money into circulation. You literally can never run out of money. Like, and Margaret Thatcher either knows that and decides to bullshit people, or she's illiterate, which I think it's probably a combination of the two. But in any case, it was a snappy slogan, and so we should steal it, right? And we should always do that. Any of these slogans that these guys come up with, we should always steal it and use it, because once you point out how stupid they are, you can use their slogans against them. How do Chinese elections work? Phenomenal question, Garden Mice. Phenomenal question. So if you look up the National People's Congress, right? The National People's Congress, the Wikipedia article is going to give you a lot of information, right? It's going to give you a lot of information about how to do that. And here, I'll even, oops. I'll even be super nice and give you the article right there. Basically, and this is really reductive. I'm going to really reduce it for you. Basically, so there's one party, okay? And to be part of the elections, you have to be part of that party. And don't get me wrong, there's factions within that party, or as there is in all this kind of stuff. But it's not a combative system. It's not a system where like you have a party and then that party is going to leave and another party is going to come in, right? So they're not constantly like going one step forward, two steps back, the way that we do here in the West under these capitalist models. There's a one-party system, and people go into the party, and there's something like 90 million, or I forget how many members of the Communist Party there are. So you start as a party member, and then as you go into the being the party member, you can run for office within your district, right? And that's very simple, just like look at a map kind of stuff, right? So like, you guys know me, I love the map. Let's look at maps. Look at maps. Maps are fun. Very simple, right? So if you're like in Jingjiadao, you run for an election, it would be very simple. It's very much how we elect people, right? But instead of people being elected, and like you have a conservative and a liberal, and they like fight one another, right? It's literally like two members of the same party, right? And you're picking which one of these guys you want, and then that guy goes up. And then you have a base floor of your party membership, right? And then the party, and that's the National People's Congress. And these people are constantly talking to the members of their own citizenry and bringing it back up to the party. So it's more like a committee, right, than it is like this confrontational party system. And then those people elect leadership. And it ends up looking a little bit closer to how the papacy is chosen, ultimately. Except it's more transparent. And so someone like Xi Jinping is elected from the National People's Congress, that he was elected to be in the National People's Congress in the first place. And then from there, he's elected into the presidency. And they erect other systems, but those are all existent by the permission of the National People's Congress. And so if you really like think about it, it's like the mass of people electing their own representatives, right, who represent the mass of people instead of special interest groups that bicker and fight amongst one another, right? And then those people erect more specialized groups who then erect the presidency, and it's all a big pyramid that at the bottom of it is the people. And all of that is responsive to what the people are saying. Could it be corrupted? Yeah, for sure it could be. But instead of it being like a full sweep away of policy or any of this kind of stuff, and they're very concerned right now that the National People's Congress itself can be corrupted from the wealth of the billionaire class, which is why whenever they see a connection happen between those two, like if there's a member of the National People's Congress and a billionaire who are like in cahoots with one another, there's a major investigation, right? And billionaires have been sentenced to death because of the outcome of those reviews, right? And members of the National People's Congress have been expelled over those sorts of things. So it is, and people in the West look at this and think like, oh, it's an authoritarian one-party rule. Oh my God! But it's when you read the theory, you realize it's the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's what it is. That you have people electing people to rule, right? Isn't that what you want? And those people are actually talking to the people who are electing them so that they can move forward on projects and initiatives that benefit the people. Instead of what we do, where we've got a liberal party that's owned by like one guy, David Thompson, basically, like the billionaire class owns the liberals. And then you have the conservative party who are owned by billionaires as well. So you have this sort of like facade of two people fighting over your affection, but neither of them actually care about you, right? And it's just a way to maintain the power of the wealthy, right? It's like a sock puppet show. It just doesn't exist in China, right? And it's very difficult for us to comprehend that as Westerners, because we take a look at our democratic system, and I talk to people fairly regularly who come in here and say like, oh, China's anti-democratic or not democratic. And I'm just like, no, it's just not Western parliamentary, right? Like, it's just a different system. That, like, our Western parliamentary system is essentially a holdover from the monarchy. It just doesn't exist. Hey Ryan, how you doing? Communism isn't based on selflessness, it's based on understanding that our personal self-interest is fundamentally aligned with the rest of humanity. Beautiful sentiment, Ryan. Beautiful sentiment, bud. I really value that. That's really nice. It's a really nice way to say it. Well, and you can see how this is bearing out in the COVID conversation, right? You can see how this is bearing out in the COVID conversation. That it's the countries who have a communal understanding, that understand that there is something larger than just the individual, that we have to be part of an organization that can actually move and shift itself, and that those sorts of shifts are necessary, right? That it is an inevitability that the world itself will inflict something upon your society that requires you to be mobile and agile as a collective people, right? And and a society that's able to do that is going to react better to those crises than the societies that we're seeing that don't. And let's be explicit. Like the crisis, the catastrophe that's happening in the southern states because of COVID is 100% tied to their fundamentalist view of individualism. And I do agree with you here, Ryan, that the distinction between individualism and collectivism is a false one. That you can acknowledge and honor the individual, the strength of the individual without sacrificing the truth of that you live in a society, that both the individual and the society are worthy of contemplation and praise and there's a word and I'm missing it. That's life, isn't it? And the societies, let's be specific, the United States, and you can do this on basically a state-by-state basis now. The states that are more interested in focusing on the collective good and ensuring that everybody is being raised up and that everything is fine are doing better with COVID than the places that are just like, you're on your own, buddy, my own individual. I don't need to mask up. Like it's your health and safety doesn't matter. My freedom does, right? Like that is and it's bearing itself out as plainly as it can. That like the originator nation of the virus is doing far better in terms of defeating that virus and mitigating the impact than a society that had months and months and months to prepare for it. And why do you think that is? Yeah, exactly. The most bizarre part of a capitalist ideology is the idea that the good of society and the good of the individual are in conflict with each other. Yes. Existential comics is brilliant that way. I've got another really good one from Existential Comics here. News that will cause stock markets to go up. A minimum wage increase is struck down. Employees are prevented from unionizing. Corporate taxes are reduced. Labor laws are relaxed. The stock market is not the economy. It's an estimate of how much wealth can be extracted from workers. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The people who are running this Existential Comics, they nail it. They really understand what's going on. They really, really understand what's going on. And it's odd that we do live in a society where we have convinced ourselves that the good of the people and the good of the individual are in conflict with one another, instead of understanding that the way that you build a society is by streamlining what's good for the individual, that what is good for the poorest person is good for the rest of society, that if you lift people out of poverty, and that's one of the endeavors of your society, is to lift individual people out of society and to create a society where poverty no longer exists, that is a net good. And the billionaire class is spending a lot of money. They are spending a lot of money to try to create an ideology that convinces people that the way to have a healthy society is to ensure that large segments of it are desperate and poor. Right? Like, what is PragerU? PragerU is 100% a billionaire wet dream that where they spend hundreds of millions of dollars to put up a bunch of videos trying to convince you to continue to impoverish your neighbors, right? Like that's what this capitalist system is doing. That it is actively spending money in order to keep people poor. That now we're in a moment where we know that it's cheaper. It's cheaper to house and feed people than it is to keep them poor and homeless in the streets. That shelter systems and the systems of poverty alleviation we have in place, or not poverty alleviation, but dealing with poverty, right? Those cost far more than it would be to just provide food and shelter, right? And so we are spending more money on purpose in order to keep people poor. And we know we're doing it because that's the goal. That's the goal of our society, right? Keep people poor, keep people desperate, and then they'll be willing to accept anything. They'll be too tired to fight back, right? That's and you can take a look at Alan Greenspan stating it cleanly in front of Congress. Alan Greenspan being one of the former heads of the Federal Reserve, right? The capitalist class is very explicit in its goal. It's very explicit in its goal to ensure the impoverishment of its society because they know that poor people will accept a diminishment of benefits, a diminishment of wages, a diminishment of fair treatment, a diminishment of quality of life, right? Because they're just fighting to survive. But now with this, now with COVID, there's a quote unquote labor shortage going on, and it is the class war come to fruition, right? That the poor have a moment where the capitalists literally abandoned them en masse, and lots of people are looking at the situation being like, oh, so this system's not even providing me basic stability any longer. And many of them are being thrown out of their houses. There's 600,000 homeless people in the United States right now. There's 600,000 people who are homeless in the United States right now. And these capitalists are scratching their heads saying like, hey, how come I'm not getting any jobs or anything like this? It's literally because people can't afford to pay the rent in the society, in the area that your job is, because your wages aren't high enough. And this is the Communist Manifesto. This is Communism 101. Eventually, capitalism destroys itself because the capitalists will suppress wages so deeply and raise rents so high that people can no longer afford to live. So they won't even work the jobs anymore because it doesn't pay the rent, right? That's exactly where we're at. But they pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and they've killed their society. I make the argument that we're no longer living in a capitalist society any longer. We're something different. That capitalism itself has already killed itself. That the businesses that exist now are state-sponsored businesses. That the business class has taken control. So I think we're in something that looks a lot more like a feudal model. That the state itself has been taken over. Have you heard about China and Evergrande, their housing market? I was just reading an article about that, Silverlight, from the Washington Post, no less. Yeah, it's going to be big ripples. You're absolutely right about that, bud. You're absolutely right about that. Well, and as China moves more and more to a socialist model, which Xi Jinping is attempting to do, and as they seize control of the means of production, it's super important and timely, right? The timing of it can't be ignored, right? Xi Jinping is standing up and saying that he's attempting to move China to the left and become a more socialist nation, just as the United States is diminishing its power, right? Just as the United States is losing power on the world stage, right? China is saying, oh, okay, so that model of capitalism, which we have allowed into our society to a certain degree, has negative outcomes, does bad things in the world. So we're going to allow the Americans to recede, and as the Americans recede, we're going to take power, right? What are the Chinese doing in Afghanistan? Literally 2 days 2 days after the Americans left Afghanistan, China started moving resources in to build Kabul into the Belt and Road Initiative. A week after, China and Iran are erecting official military allegiances with one another, right? They're taking the loose arrangements that they have had in place for a decade or two, and they're tightening them, right? They're tightening them. It's very, very obvious that what China wants to do is build from the Kashgar Prefecture, which is the end of the Belt and Road Initiative in that region, send it right through the Wakhan corridor into Kabul, from Kabul to Madrid. Is it Madrid? No, it's not Madrid. What am I doing? Mashhad, and then over to Tehran, and then up through Turkey into Europe. It's really obvious that that's what they're doing. And it's so obvious that the former rulers of Afghanistan have taken over sections of the road to that region so that they can leverage it in order to become viceroys, essentially, is what's going to happen there. And China is doing it by building, right? And the United States is like saying, oh, we want to stop them. Oh, we want to stop them. Well, guess what? China can build faster than the United States can bomb. That's just the truth. China can build faster than the United States can bomb. So the United States is going to do what it can. And the new arrangement that has come from the United States, the anti-China arrangement, is an abandonment of NATO. Like, why isn't NATO just arranging itself and going after China, right? It's because most of NATO doesn't want to. Canada, Germany, right? They're not interested. France, they're not interested. They don't want to go along with this idea that we're going to confront China. Why would they want to do that? China has been nothing but beneficial to Europe, right? And most of Europe wants to keep it that way. And so the United States arranges a new military agreement between the United Kingdom, which is essentially a worthless island that can't go anywhere else, right? They can't go with the EU because of Brexit. And so it's the United States, the UK, and Australia, right? And they've formed a military alliance to be anti-China. It's not going to culminate into anything. It's not going to go anywhere, right? They don't have support with the rest of the world. They don't have support, and it just shows you how little power the United States actually has. That the only thing that's really going to come from that agreement is going to set a precedent to keep Australia away from becoming just a Chinese province, right? Australia, their number one trading partner is China, and what's interesting about that arrangement is that Australia itself is not that thrilled about it. They're really only doing it to keep the United States from doing negative shit to them, right? Like that the U.S. is going to do stuff like bomb Indonesia or Papua New Guinea or Malaysia or the Philippines or something, right? They'll destroy like little island nations the way that they do, right? In order to build like a lily pad or a big military base there or something, right? And Australia just wants to make sure that it's not them. That's it. Like Australia just wants to make sure that when the United States starts bombing shit in the region, it's not bombing Australia. That's the reason the arrangement exists. But Australia is not going to like be gung-ho about it. Their number one trading partner is China. They're not going to be happy with a war between America and China, for sure. So what we are seeing is China seizing the moment, realizing that American power is diminishing and is in free fall, and getting ahead of it and saying, oh, hey, this capitalist model is clearly failing. It's clearly collapsing. So instead of watching it collapse, watching it take over and collapse in our own society, we're just going to cap it. We're going to seize control of it, right? And the analogy that I've been using recently, especially for people who walk in here and say that, oh, China is a capitalist nation. It's like, no, China understands what capitalism is. Probably better than the capitalists do, right? The analogy is that capitalism is a fire, right? And fire is useful, right? It can do useful things, but you don't want to let it out of its fireplace, right? If you let fire out of the fireplace, it takes over, it takes charge, and then you'll really see what the invisible hand of the market has planned, right? Whereas if you keep it in the fireplace and the only time you interact with it is like special tools and shit, well, that's fine. That works. So that seems to be what China is doing. And as America begins to decline in power and prestige on the world stage, China's going to take over. Yeah, who would have thought that foreign policy helping other countries to build their infrastructure and economy would result in reciprocal, peaceful prosperity and partnerships, right? I thought that we were all selfish. I thought that everything was about selfishness, right? Isn't it everything is completely about screwing over other people to steal their resources? Isn't that the whole thing, right? Like, this is how you know our leaders have been sociopaths for a long time, right? This is how you know that wealth generates sociopathic behavior. This is how you know, because the sociopaths are doing everything they can to convince us that we are like they are, right? That if it wasn't us bombing other people, like if people in the Middle East became powerful, they would just destroy us first. So we're just going to go ahead and do that, right? It's but when you actually step back and you take a look at how humans actually are, right? Like, we very much want to help one another. We very much want to build communities. We very much want to be part of, we're social creatures, for God's sakes. Like, we're social creatures. The reason why our best buddies are dogs is because we're pack animals like they are, right? And this idea that you can build a sustainable society by cutting each other's throats, like, that's not serious. That's not real. Well, we're getting to the end of this one. This was a weird one, I gotta tell you. This was a weird one. I felt weird the whole time. I'm gonna blame the new chair. I'm gonna say that I got a new chair, and I'm actually sitting here and I'm actually comfortable. I don't feel like I've got a spear in my back. Oh, I don't think I saw you here, PLC. Good to see you, bud. I'm glad that you're here. I don't know how to close this thing out. We got 3 minutes left. Lots of China, not a lot of Canada. I mean, Canada doesn't want to go to war with China. We've so much of our economy is like tied into what's going on with China. Like, so much of it. And like, it would be no different if the conservatives came in. Like, the conservatives are all like anti-China and rah-rah anti-China, but like, if they got into power, they absolutely would look at China and be like, oh, yeah, we're making a lot of fucking money with you. Like, we're definitely going to stay. We're definitely going to attach our wagon to China's star. Like, that's what's 100% happening in Canada. The only reason we do things that are anti-China is just when the United States tells us to. So that we can be like, oh, okay, buddy. Yeah, okay. Yeah, the two Michaels, eh? Ooh. Oh, you want us to kidnap a banker and keep her here? Okay, America, yeah, don't bomb us, don't bomb us, America. That's essentially how it works. That we're actually doing business with China. With the United States, we're just kind of happy they're not coming up here and fucking us up. That's basically it. All right, guys, I'm going to close this one down. You are all wonderful people, right? Each one of you is a divine being standing in divine energy. These billionaires are going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to convince you that something else is going on. We shouldn't let them. If we go to war with China, I'm leaving Canada. Yeah, we're not going to go to war with China, dude. Like, honestly, Major, hydraulic, straight up, if we go to war with China, there is nowhere that anyone will be able to go to escape it. Like, an outright war with China, yeah, you're looking at a conflagration that is so big that it will absorb the entire world. You're looking at like full scale disaster if that happens. And even the United States is not crazy enough to do that. You're going to see a minor proxy conflict in this region. That's what you're going to see. We should take bets. What do you think? The Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam. Vietnam and number 2, right? We'll see. We'll see. All right, guys. That's the end of me. Good luck. We're going to need it.